all of a sudden I was like standing in nature with like a circle of like 9 women all doing sex magic. And we were like free and liberated and everyone was in their divinity. And it was like so incredible.
The truth is that we're all the master. We're all the healer. We're all the mystic.
Give it up one time for Aubrey Martin.
Layla Martin. Wailana Marcus. We're here.
We're here.
We're going for it today.
I'm now thinking about masturbating in my car. Like, you know, when people are like texting in the car and you're like, I'm going to die. Sometimes you're like, I'm trying to like channel pleasure in the car. This is dangerous. And I got to like tone it down.
I feel like that's easier for women than men. Men, it's like a kind of like a process because like you can't start. There's like a starting point to masturbating. Otherwise, it's just self-groping.
Oh my God.
Like you don't just start masturbating as a man. You got to like get it
Well, we got
warmed
to
up.
elevate like self-groping in the car though. You know, it's just like living a turned on life. It should happen anywhere.
It's actually an interesting thought to like think of a guy like how like a woman can turn herself on and thinking of a guy doing that. It's like weird. Kind of.
We have like associated so much more shame around male sexuality in that particular way. Because like me and my friends, when we're like driving, we're like, oh yes, I'm turning my pleasure on. Like I'm activated. I'm here. There's something that's like, oh yeah, bitch, you're like claiming your power. And then a guy's doing it in the car and you're like, oh. Like,
does it seem weird because it seems feminine? Like in your body, the way that feels to try to just.
It just doesn't really start working until a certain point. Right, like it's not
like you have to have some kind of stimulation.
Pleasure. There's like a engorgement threshold into where it actually starts getting like, oh, now it's getting good, you know. But at the start, you're like, come on, buddy, like let's get in the game here.
You look like you're
turned on in this like, pre-engorgement threshold. We can do this.
There's like nothing happening, and then it starts to happen. Then you're like, okay, now we're playing. Now we're going for it.
We are starting out on fire. Welcome to this podcast.
This whole podcast is going to be called Masturbating in Cars. How to do it based on gender.
How to masturbate flaccid.
Oh all right.
Well, we are kind of starting off talking about that because what I wanted to do is take us on an arc of all of the practices that someone can do individually, and then the challenges that those practices are trying to solve for and help you grow from and through, and then as a couple, and then when you expand the container beyond a couple, and how to stack all of these different practices, the challenges that you encounter, what you could unlock and reveal about yourself. So in a way, we are starting right on track.
I'm glad you got us out of the other rabbit hole and just took us straight in because that sounds so much better than where we were going. It's like 45 minutes later and we're like, no, but you could just scrape your testicles like as you hold the wheel of your left hand.
Is it the softest brush or is it a little more vigorous?
You gotta put your hand underneath the
seatbelt. Should it be silk? Should it be cotton?
Hand underneath the seatbelt so it's more comfortable for your wrist.
Thanks for all the tips.
Yeah.
But let's talk about this because as an individual, we all carry different aspects of shame, repression, retraction, different things that we can start the practice of working on by ourselves. And a lot of this needs to unlock with a partner because a lot of the trauma is created in partnerships and unconscious partnerships in particular. But some of the work can start you with you, and that's the safest place to do it. But for a lot of us, it's not a safe place because there's still the judging eye and the judging mind and the shameful eye and the shameful mind that's preventing us from actually liberating. And perhaps it's just an absence of tools and a lack of awareness of what might be underneath the surface. So let's talk about it for men and for women. And I guess I'll go lead in first because we already started talking about non-engorged masturbation for men. I want to talk about for men because I do feel like, and of course these are all generalizations, and you know any man and women can have overlapping or different things that happen. Gender is very fluid in this regard. So we're speaking in generalities and from my own personal experience. For me, like one of the big challenges that I've encountered in myself and in other men is one of the most difficult things is the pressure to perform. This is a major one. And I can think back to my performance failures, in quotes, and how brutal I was on myself. I mean, I think I've told this story once at some point before, but there was one time where I had a new partner in Australia, and I was in college, and it just wasn't happening. It just wasn't happening. And she was like, bummed out, but she was being nice enough about it. But I was so mad at myself. I was like, you know what? You're going to stay up all night and write hate letters to yourself. And I really did. I forced myself to stay awake all night and write letters about how much I hated myself. Like, that's sad and deep, and it was this pattern of like, oh, you're not a man, you're not worthy, and I wrapped up my entire worth in my sexuality and in my performance. Now, of course, that did wonders for my confidence moving forward. It was a great strategy that I used. Hate letters to yourself is probably the worst thing a being can do, but I did it nonetheless. And of course, I've subsequently learned from it. It's the antithesis of what you really want to do, which is love yourself fully and wholly, and really embrace the totality of your sexuality beyond your engorgement and performance level. So for a man, let's just talk about this one challenge, and there's some other challenges that we can get into, but this being, in my mind, the primary challenge that men encounter, and also the causal force that's preventing men from actually being present in sexuality, because we're worried about how we're performing, we're concerned about different things, we're trying to prove to ourselves that we're a man in a certain way. What is something that a man can do with himself to help start to unlock and reveal and start to heal some of these deep patterns?
So giving yourself a container in which to address that, feel those things, do these practices, right? It sounds so simple, but it's like if you were going to go, if someone was teaching you how to get fit and they were like, well, you just got to lift this weight, but there was no concept of like a home gym or having like a workout, right? So for a lot of us, we just think there's masturbation and there's sex. And so what I like to encourage people to do is to actually like create a sex practice where it's 10, 15 minutes, an hour if you want to go super pro, and you do it once a week. And that's your time to actually address these pieces. Because if you don't have that container, it's like, when are you ever going to do it? Like, when are you just going to casually like find love for your cock or undo all of that conditioning around performance? You have to create a container. So I like for people to have this idea of, okay, to commit to this, I need a conscious time where I'm going to sit down and do it. So from there, it's really understanding that we tend to think like, okay, as a man, it can be like, my sexuality is just my sexuality. And we don't understand all these forces that are piled on top of it, right? So from a very young age, like scientific research has shown that like infants pick up on disgust cues from parents, and they won't touch a toy that a parent looks at with disgust. So many of us started getting even body conditioning at such a young age. Like babies will masturbate in utero, and most babies, if they try and touch their penis or their genitals, their parents will stop them, right? So we don't even know sometimes what's gotten in there. Sometimes it can be so pre-verbal so early, right? And then you're growing up, like a lot of guys have shame around getting erections at the school dance, or having a fear of, how exactly they're going to perform if they're not good enough. Whatever you experienced growing up, shame around masturbation, right? So every single time you masturbate, you are basically developing neuronal pathways in your brain that are cued emotionally and with whatever else you're experiencing at the time, that your body starts associating with the experience of sex. So when you go to do a sex practice, it's like you're not just sitting down and dealing with your penis, you're dealing with your entire history of what's happened sexually. And even if we don't, we're not even talking about like major traumas that can happen to men, or major issues like life experiences like what you're describing, just your kind of run-of-the-mill experiences add up to create really intense sexual conditioning. And in the nervous system, that doesn't just show up as like kind of shadows impacting your sexuality. It literally shows up physiologically as tension inside of your pelvis, as a kind of disconnection from the sensations inside of your penis. And so there's this whole kind of conditioned desensitization that happens, that's all of these layers. So when you're talking about something like unwinding performance, it goes to the heart of, can you get back to trusting your sexuality, trusting your sensations, trusting your pleasure,
trusting your penis.
Trusting your penis, whatever it wants to do or not do.
Yeah.
And so much of that flies in the face of this sense of distrust, right? Like what happens if you don't get hard? What happens if she doesn't have an orgasm?
Or you come too quickly.
You come too quickly, right? Like what happened? Like, and then there's all this shame layered around it, right? Which is so societal. So it's like this, I just want to say like, yeah, okay, we're going to talk about these very specific practices, but it's like this heroic journey to actually sit down and be like, I'm going to reclaim my sexuality. I'm going to unwind my addiction to performance. It's not so simple. It takes so much to even get to that point where you decide to do that. Yes,
indeed. And I think also, there's so much, one of the things that I've recognized is that amount of, it's fear that becomes the thing that blocks you. And what am I really afraid of? I'm afraid of myself, not necessarily the woman judging me. I'm afraid of myself judging me, because who was making me write the letters? Was she making me write the letters? Was she saying that you need to be punished for this failure? No, that was me. And that was me conditioned from, some things that I saw in childhood with my parents' divorce and some lyrics that I heard in songs like, you're not fucking your woman right, then I will, this type of thing. Like if you don't do it right, somebody else is going to come in and take your love from you because you're not performing in bed. And that's the thing that matters the most, all of this stuff. So it's like, well, I'm going to teach you the way that my basketball coach taught me, whereas you fuck something up, you run suicides. And that was me making myself run suicides. Now it's a shitty way to coach a basketball player. And it's also a even shittier way to coach yourself when it comes to something that's very sensitive and needs to be done in the absence of fear.
Yeah. And your penis is alive. Your body is alive, right? We have this thing of like, your cells are alive, how you talk to yourself. We have this like compassion for our hearts. Like if you're sitting there yelling at your heart, what's it going to do? It's going to close up, right? We have this like intuitive knowing, but we're so disconnected from how we speak to like our pussies and our penises. It's this judgment, criticism, shame all the time. What's going to happen? It's going to close up and you're not going to have the deep, sensitive, mind-blowing sexual experiences that you crave. And on the simplest level, it's how you're actually speaking to your body.
Yeah. So what can you do? Let's say there's some men listening, I'm sure there are, that resonate with some of this, some of what I was going through when I was in my early 20s. And as I can talk about some of the ways that I've evolved through it, but it's been a long process. It's been a very holistic process. But what I've never done is any intentional, conscious practice with my relationship with my cock. We've just we have this arm length trust of each other now. We've been ride or die homies for a long time. Like, bro, we've been through a lot. And I respect you. We may not see eye to eye on everything, but I respect you and I appreciate you. But it's still not like we're one. I have not formed union with my cock. It's still like, all right, buddy. It's like I have a wild wolf that's on a leash, and I'm like, we doing this today? We going for a walk today, right? All right. We're not going to bite anybody. We're gonna be cool, right? We're gonna howl when we need to howl, and we're gonna lay down and be nice when we need to lay down and be nice. But it's this very interesting relationship. But I feel like even though this is it's working, but if there was tools, even now, even with all the work I've done to create this relationship of me and my wolf, like there's probably some practices that I could do because I've never done anything.
Yeah.
Like some things that I could do intentionally to be like, all right, let's strengthen this and let's collapse this separation so that I am my cock and my cock is me. And it's not, all of the things. And we talk about it like that all the time. Like this is the head that you think from and blah, blah, blah. Like collapsing that into being one being again and a being that expresses love in totality.
Totally. So I just had the image of you and your cock like riding on like Harley Davidsons or like whatever the cool motorcycle is now, like together and like being like, bro, you know? But then at one point your cock like jumps on the back and like the two of you cry,
Oh my God.
Yeah, he's in a sidecar.
Yeah,
the cock is in like a little sidecar, and we're doing this. Yeah. He's got his glasses on, like our hair's streaming back. Like, you wearing a helmet today? No. All right, I get it.
I got involved.
I get it.
Touches me deeply. Okay, sex practice, boom, 15 minutes. Get yourself lube, oil, whatever you want to use. And the first is this intention, right? So it's clear that you have an intention, right? Like, I want to be one with my cock.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever your intention is, having that. Like, this is an intentional space for my sexuality, for my relationship with my body. Number two is, what is the emotional tone I want to have? So most of the time we'll carry the emotional tone in our penis or our pussy that we just picked up along the way. So for a lot of women, that's like this shame or disconnection or sense that there's something wrong. And it can be actually a lot of the same for men. There can be shame, there can be fear, or there can be a kind of like, even like, yo, like my cock's amazing. Like that's usually sitting on some kind of unprocessed emotional tone. And so being like, how do I actually want to feel about my penis? Do I want to love it? Being like, how do I actually want to feel about my penis? Do I want to love it? Do I want to be proud of it?
Yeah.
Do I want to feel like it's spiritual? Do I want to feel like it's powerful? Do I want to feel like it's a gift, right? And so that's really important, because before you actually start touching yourself, you want to pick one or two emotional tones and like pull those in so that you are actually choosing, like, what is my emotional relationship with this part of my body? And that starts to change your emotional relationship to sex as well.
Yeah.
The next thing is you can actually talk to your penis. This sounds really crazy to a lot of people, but it fucking works. And your penis will talk back to you in images and words and things like that. So even like that conversation, like you essentially just demonstrated a conversation with your penis where you're like, yo, like we're ride or die, but we're still arm's length. And like how are we gonna like, and literally you can say that to your penis and feel there's going to be communication back. And this really helps you as well. Like, this helps us get out of this disconnection that we have, right? Like, your body is this disconnected, unanimated thing. And really, like, no, this is a living force inside of me, right? And one of the most beautiful things in the tantric tradition that I've experienced over and over again is our bodies are these center points of universal energy. So like, your cock is representative. It's literally the transmission and the embodiment of universal penetration, spiritual awakening, alignment. And so when you start to relate to it, you can start to feel it not as what like all of society has told you it is, but how you actually feel it to be. So pussy to me is like the center point of universal celebration and ecstasy, right? And womb is its own energy and cervix is its own energy. And so there's these like pulsating, profound energies that start to unlock, and it can start with like a basic conversation.
Yeah. I can really like see that. And there's a deep conversation, and actually even still like forgiveness. That's like, because there's been so much judgment and so much like, you really let me down this time, buddy. You know, like not even buddy, like probably something much harsher, but like, fuck you, like, I can't believe you betrayed me. And so many of that. But have I ever gone back and been like, sorry about that, like we're all the same, like that was unnecessary, and I love you, and thank you for everything that you've offered, and really bringing that back together. And I can see how that can be effective. And I imagine some, like you said, like some kind of nice oil, like jojoba oil or something. And just like with touch, with words, just not in a masturbatory, way that I've touched my cock many times, but in this other, much more loving way, totally. Like divine father way of like, all right, like we're gonna heal, some of these things, the words, the thoughts, the things that have gone between us, and start fresh and start anew.
Yeah.
It also seems like it also takes the pressure off. Like, I think for so many people going into sex, it's with the end game that they're like, okay, well, it is to come, So like when you're going into masturbation, it's always like you're like reaching for this end game. But if you're actually just presencing with yourself and listening and tuning in and creating, the intention or the desire of what you want to feel, like it just, I can actually feel the energy of how that would shift your sexuality so significantly, and probably, just take all the pressure off, because you're not just going for that end game anymore. You're like, no, like I'm going to be sexual.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And those animal metaphors, like you said, wolf, right? And like I've thought of my pussy as a literal like cat, right? Like a tiger or like an actual kitten. And you think if you went in like in a relationship to a wolf, if you were like, give me what I fucking want. Like I need something out of you. Like every single time you just went in and you're like, I'm getting what I need from you, right? And like you better give it to me. Like what would that do to that wolf, to your relationship to it, versus like being in like the relationship you would actually want, which is like respectful, connected, loving. Like, yeah, like I would love to have this experience with you, but like we're in a relationship. It's not just I'm coming in and telling you what to do for me.
Yeah.
There's also another really powerful piece about what the phallus or the yoni represents in a spiritual, metaphorical way.
Yeah.
And in the way in which, you know, this is the penetrating force of a man, you know, embodied in the physical form, but it is a representation of the total way in which we penetrate the world with our ideas, with our love, with our care, with our, you know, everything that we have to offer. So if there's a disconnection with the physical, there's likely some disconnection with the spiritual way in which that, you know, I'm not actualizing the totality of my penetrative force because there's a disconnect between my literal penetrative force and some way in which that relationship isn't quite right. And so getting that relationship quite right, you know, getting that relationship right then will allow me to express myself in totality. And that concept is also really important because one of the things that really was helpful for all of this performance anxiety was to realize that my sexuality wasn't condensed to my cock, that my entire body is my cock.
Yeah.
And that when I'm making love to Wailana, I'm not making love with just my penis. I'm making love with the totality of myself, with my hands, with my mouth, with my energy, with my chest, with my eyes, with my breath, with every part of me is part of the act of making love. And it's all important. So, and the unnecessary, you know, prioritization of this one aspect, it just puts everything out of balance. And so when I brought that back in balance more, everything started to smooth out a lot. But it's all, you know, I can see how it's all working towards this more holistic understanding of the masculine as a penetrative force, not in a forceful way, but in a way of like, this is what I have to offer. And I'm waiting for whatever the world wants to open to me, not trying to force my way through, but what is the yoni of the world or the yoni of my woman? How deeply is it opening?
Yeah.
And, you know, and how safe can they feel based on the strength that I can hold?
Yeah. And it's like when people have this sort of amorphous fear of like taking plant medicine, right? It's often like a fear of discovering their own power, their own divinity, their own oneness with the universe. Pussy and penis are like this locus points of internal divinity, like that, like full activation. It's not an accident that our disempowerment inside of ourselves went hand in hand with so much sexual shame, so much sexual control. So it's like when you're facing this kind of like generalized fear of going in there, of having a conversation with your penis, it's literally also a fear of your own divinity and greatness, because that is the end point of having the deepest relationship to your sexuality. And I think what happens sometimes is people, when they're trying to be full-bodied and full-hearted, but it's not driven by connection to the penis, it's like it doesn't have that full, like the sexuality doesn't fully open and flow. So that's also why with men, with anyone really, I recommend that they actually start with their genitals first. So like that's the ground from which then the entire body and heart and everything else that you make love with comes alive.
Yeah, it's almost like if you want to change your consciousness, use the levers that are in the body.
Yeah.
Right? Like you talk to so many of the smartest people, like from Tony Robbins to Andrew Huberman, who are like, all right, if you want to change something about the way you're thinking, go to your breath.
Yeah.
Don't go to your thoughts. Go to your breath.
Yes.
Go to your nervous system first. Go to the physical, tangible ways. Go into a cold plunge. Get a hard workout. Do some breathing. A lot of your thoughts are going to change on their own if you start changing your nervous system. And
Totally.
like a lot of these aspects of our spiritual becoming will change if we go to the physical and start doing that work that we can actually do, you know, with the levers that we have available that are tangible.
Totally. And like all of these luminaries in society kind of on the cutting edge are talking about the nervous system in this way. We often forget that most of our major nerves actually innervate our pelvic floor, our entire sexual region. It's so important for the vagus nerve. So when we have this like subtle disconnection from our sexuality, from our pelvic floor, from our genitals. I wish there's a better word for genitals. It's like so unsexy. I'm trying to like invent all new words. Even the pudendal nerve, it means the shame nerve in Latin. We're like, that's like the major nerve that innervates the clitoris. Got to change it. So anyways, it's like when you come alive in this way, you're also activating these very rich nerve endings that are so essential for your entire nervous system. So when you're subtly shutting that down with like shame and fear and guilt and contraction, it's actually these like core parts of your nervous system that are getting shut down. And just like we finally recognize like the gut is so important for every aspect of our being, literally the way that you relate to your pussy and your penis impacts your entire nervous system. How you feel, how you relate to the world, yes, spiritually, but also just biologically.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Vi, you're up. Why don't you share some of the challenges you felt in your sexuality and then offer Layla the opportunity to talk about how to.
Yeah, for sure.
We have many more men's practices though.
Oh,
like we could add just a couple more if we want.
Let's keep going.
Yeah.
Let's just stop at the talking.
All right, let's go. Let's go.
And then we'll jump in. Okay, great. So from there, what I would recommend is doing a basic, what I call body meditation. So anywhere from 1 minute to 5 minutes, which is to actually scan your pelvic floor, your testicles, and your penis, and to describe the sensation you're feeling and where you're feeling it. And what this does is it actually trains your nervous system to become very sensitized to the sensations inside of your penis and helps you with that thing that you're talking about. That sense of separation happens because most of the time you're going throughout your day and you only pay attention to your penis when something massive is going on down there versus having this like everyday sensitized, connected reality. And so what happens when you do something like a body meditation is you give more brain space to the experience of sensation inside of your penis. And so what that means is you become more sensitive and you're able to feel more. That's also a big part of why a lot of men aren't able to be super satisfying if they have female partners to women in the bedroom, is because they're actually subtly desensitized. And so they're having to fuck with a level of intensity and disconnection to actually feel. So you can retrain your system to actually feel more with less.
That feels really important for women too, because when a man is very disconnected and they're just like jackhammer bunny, I mean, sometimes that's great, but like when they're disconnected, the woman feels it, and it's also not very pleasurable for them to be disconnected from their own pleasure because it can be abrasive.
Totally.
Yeah.
And like really deep, intense, hard sex feels good at like when your whole body is opened. But prior to that moment, it's like if anyone tries to massage your back and they go in super hard and you're not like,
whoa.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what your body does. When a pussy does that, when a pelvic floor does that, when an anus does that, all that's left is like pain or disconnection or numbness.
Yeah.
So this idea of being able to be slow enough, sensitive enough, connected enough that the body can open, and then you can be available for whatever you really desire. But if you go in too hard, too fast, the body's going to automatically contract. And that's where a lot of women end up being so performative with men in the bedroom, because their bodies never got the chance to open. And once your body has contracted, it's felt unconsensual, it's felt too hard, it's felt too fast. It's very hard to unwind that again.
Yeah.
And then you just feel disconnected and numb. So the only thing you have available to you is like performance or faking an orgasm or just getting it over with, unless you're like literally, and this is so hard to do, empowered enough to be like, wait, my body shut down. Like we need to stop and pause until I can open back up again. So like it's simple, like a penis meditation. You're like, oh, and it has like such a real world impact.
The desensitization is something that I think is kind of universal. And I think in different ways, I think men often run into the desensitization through pornography.
They're learning that way.
You
That's
know,
what they're
like the way that we're taking on sexuality is like the most intense energy, like through a fire hose in this sexual encounter that's tapping into all kinds of different, our own traumas and our own desire for domination and our own, ego's desire to be the most powerful one and to have, somebody serve us or whatever the thing is that it's tapping into, and it's just like blasting. And that kind of desensitization, when you get into the actual lovemaking, you could be used to this kind of force that's coming in. So that could make you want to force, like, oh, well, this is what I'm used to. This is the neuronal pathways that I've trained within myself. And I think that's a challenge that we can get into. And I don't think it's probably too dissimilar to a woman that uses an ever escalating, increasing intensity of a vibrator every day.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, like the subtle touch of their male lover is like, what are you doing? Do you have do you have something with some power that you can get here? But it's the same idea. But I think, men don't have that for their cock, but they have it for their mind, which is the absolute extension of your cock in that way. And so being mindful of desensitizing yourself.
Yes.
And it's not to put shame upon, the act of watching porno that's bad. It's like, this is very pragmatic. This is like practical.
Yeah. Like, let's look at the impact. Like, what's the impact of eating white sugar? You don't have to feel ashamed about it. You don't have to feel bad, but what does it do to your body?
Right.
And I think we can have a realistic conversation about porn, of what is that doing to your nervous system, to your relationship to sexuality over and over again. It's an important conversation for our society to have. And the other thing with this body meditation, right? There's so much in every practice. They seem so simple and like there's so much packed into it. So that performance, right? We like to, as a culture, try and control our reality, like prefrontal cortex. This is how I want to feel. This is what I want to happen. I'm going to try and control my body into getting me that outcome. So a lot of us in sex are coming from prefrontal cortex. We're fantasizing. We're trying to make an orgasm happen. We're future oriented, right? That's the most, it's a beautiful part of the brain, but it's also the part of the brain where like very little magic happens, right? So if you want to experience powerful sex, rich feelings, like potent orgasms, all of that happens in the deeper parts of the nervous system. You call it the reptilian brain. I like to think of it as like the primal brain, the limbic system. So it's these richer, deeper parts of the nervous system that actually give us the sexual experiences that we're craving. When we're continuously controlling our body from the cortex, we're actually numbing out those sensations. They can see that in MRI scans that they've done of people who are masturbating, that they actually will have numbed physical sensations because controlling parts of their brain are going in and shutting down the pleasure. So something as simple as a body meditation, it shifts you out of sex coming from your cortex into sex happening from within. And it's a type of surrender and a type of trust, because you're then starting to allow your sensations to dictate what you're going to do, how you're going to move, how you're going to feel. And it switches the whole thing from I'm going to perform and control sexuality to I'm going to allow sexuality through me, which can feel even more powerful. Like in our society, we think that control is more powerful, but actually sex coming from within is the more powerful experience. I think most of us would agree. So even though it's like these very simple sexual practices are actually rewiring your nervous system in really powerful ways.
Yeah, and we'll get to this when we talk about partnership, but I think one of the beautiful things about being in this partnership with Wailana is that there's, I think in past relationships, because of this performative element, and actually, polyamory was not particularly healthy for that aspect because it was inherently felt competitive.
Yeah.
Like it was like, fuck, like we're really in it here, And so
come on,
must control penis harder.
Yeah, exactly. Because otherwise he is whoever he is, But this, there was this kind of like at the moment where you felt the engorgement start to wane, there was this like, gotta summon the most aggressive thing I can in my mind to keep this thing moving at the highest level. Because be better. Yeah, because I had this outcome that I needed to achieve.
Yeah.
But in our lovemaking, as it's unfolded, which has been very healing for both of us, as that happens, there's just no fear. If it goes all the way to, to retraction and we're just holding ourselves and loving each other, like that's fine. I've never felt one flinch from Vi in any of those situations. So because there's no fear, the reality doesn't manifest and so I don't have to reach for these things that I've conditioned through years of pornography viewing and things. It's like, all right, like here we are and this is what's here now. And it's just this sense of ease that I'm still actually trusting more and more. Like it's still a process of unwinding many years of like, come on, here we go. Like, let's get ready to rumble. Like, come on. Yeah, exactly. You know, it's just like, no. Like, it's all good. Like, we got all the time in the world. Make love to each other.
Yeah. Okay, so 2 more steps to this so that I would recommend. So it's like a complete introductory practice. So the next would be, so then you start touching your penis like you normally would to masturbate, but probably like 5 times slower than you usually would. And you want to slow everything down so you're really feeling. And again, you're still kind of keeping that emotional tone there. Like if I wanted to feel love, if I wanted to feel reverence, if I wanted to feel forgiveness, whatever it is, I'm like connected to that as I start to touch my own body. And so as you start stroking your penis, then you're going to bring in breath work. So again, it can be anywhere from like 2 to 5 minutes of breath work and doing a deeper, fuller breath than you usually would. And again, a lot of these sexual practices, they've got the same intention, which is you're going to take down cortical control. So when you touch your penis most of the time, because I do it all the time, but this is, I know from touching my own pussy, so I'm going to extrapolate and talking to like, you know, whatever, tens of thousands of men. So the like when you go to touch your penis, when you start bringing in that breath work, and you're going to breathe as though you could breathe into your testicles, into your penis, into your pelvic floor, into your anus. What happens is it collapses your everyday sense of being able to control your sexuality, and it collapses the inclination, the very conditioned inclination to think about your sexuality. So to either fantasize or to start thinking about orgasm or to feel your pleasure and then just push your pleasure, right, towards something. What happens when you're breathing like that is you can't control in the same way, because that kind of breath work is literally silencing your cortex. And what happens is it allows the sensational limbic responses to become stronger. You actually feel them more. So what will happen in that case is like kind of on a spectrum from feeling more pleasure, feeling more intensity, feeling more turn on, or it can actually be feeling the unfelt things. So when you start breathing, you might feel the shame. You might feel the sense that you need to control. You might feel the numbness. You might have a memory float up of a past sexual experience. So what you're doing is, instead of going down and being like, okay, penis, like this is what's going to happen, you're basically saying, I'm here.
It's a conversation.
It's a conversation. And what's here? What's here now? And so you're training your body and your sexuality to be less controlled and to actually show you what's there. And so this is where, when we say, like, throw out a word like sexual healing, like this is where you actually make the space for something like that to happen. And it literally can happen. Like, yes, you can do super intensive sexual healing, but even just that 5 minutes, you'd be surprised how much your body will allow. It's almost like the body's always wanting to heal, but we don't let that natural inclination.
100%.
Yeah, until it's like things are awful. And then we're like,
Totally.
oh, now I'm desperate. And now I got to do it.
Exactly. So you're basically saying to your body, okay, like here's
Show
the
me.
space.
Yeah.
Show me what's unfelt, right? And just like that Carl Jung quote, like, you know, what, like the unfelt things, like if you don't feel them, they'll end up controlling you. You'll call it your destiny. It's the same thing with your sexuality. Like all the unfelt things in your body and your sexuality, they'll end up dictating who you are as a sexual being, who your partner ends up being, what kind of relationship you navigate, unless you have the courage to feel them. Once you start feeling them, it's not about getting rid of them or feeling shame that you have them, but then you start to have choice, right? Because then it's not subtly controlling your sexual experience anymore. You can actually get underneath the conditioning, and then that's where you have the ability to choose, right? And so, like, from what I hear of what you're experiencing with Wailana, you've gone deep enough now that you have the choice between, you know, the like, oh, I'm going to like just go in there and perform, or the sense of like, I'm going to fucking connect and like feel what's here and be in it. And again, like, it's not about like the performance is wrong or we can never do that or it's shameful, but it's like giving yourself the choice neurologically.
Yeah.
And you don't get that choice until you feel those pieces and then train yourself through things like meditation and breath work to get underneath them.
Yeah.
And then that's literally where you're sitting deep enough in your nervous system to feel that there even is a choice, let alone make one sexually.
Instead of just like running a program that's like, oh, here we are, here's this pattern again, like
and that's the deepest bliss of sexual union, is when the mind is completely out of the way and you don't have to fantasize about anything. You're just right there in the moment. And this idea, it occurs to me that it feels like a level of sexual mastery would be able to take that process all the way through a climax by yourself,
yes,
without actually getting into the fantasy patterns. Like, it's something that seems like, whoa, that seems almost impossible, because I've had a whole lifetime of, no matter where I'm masturbating, it could be in the dark by myself, but nonetheless, the mind is still running something else to stimulate me. So it's like external, images and thoughts disconnected from my sensation, which I'm creating. And then in the merger, I can get ejaculation. But in this way, and it's not even about the ejaculation, but it feels like if you could do that without reaching to your fantasies and get to the point where you can actually reach full sexual ecstasy,
yes,
that would be incredibly powerful. And
yes,
then it translates so well. It's definitely easier with a partner, but it seems like if you could do that with yourself, then wow, that would be powerful.
Totally. That's one of the challenges in our courses that we have, is we actually have people do like 30 days of no fantasizing while they are self-pleasuring, to literally build that neural pathway. Because people, if you never do that, your brain likes to do what it's always done, and it likes the easy trigger point. So it's just like, great, fantasy, let's do it. When you take the time to actually build that, and at first your brain and body are gonna be like, hell no. Like, there's like, whenever I invite people to do this, they're like, what the fuck? Like this is like, no way am I ever gonna be able to orgasm by just touching myself and not thinking about fucking, And I'm like, no, trust me. It's gonna feel real bad at first, It's like quitting sugar. Like at first you're like, oh my God, how, And then like 2 or 3 weeks into it, you're like, oh shit, this is a whole new way of being. So like, I literally challenge people to do that, and they make that leap. And what's amazing, right, is because your inner relationship reflects the outer relationship. So when you can have that level of intimacy with your own sensation and your own body, then you can look into someone else's eyes and be that connected as well. So there's nothing wrong with sexual fantasies. Like, I still love to use them in some of my self-pleasuring. I had to train myself out of ever using them with a partner. I don't really like using them with a partner anymore. But in the sexual fantasizing, I was like, it's a form of dissociation, right? Like when I sexually fantasize, I check out of what's going on in my body.
And you're allowing
I go somewhere else. So there must be something that I don't want to feel. Right? There must be something that like I'm missing. And so I've done this with like a number of my fantasies, but when I used to be addicted to fantasizing with my partner, like right before, I couldn't have an orgasm without having a fantasy with a partner in sex. And when I was like, what is the trigger point that's happening? I literally like went down into my pussy. I was like, we're not going to fantasize. I'm going to feel what the fuck is happening right now. And as I went in, it was like a legion of priests, because like I was raised Catholic. And I was like, what's underneath the priests? And I went in, and it was like lust, like that raw, primal, like female lust. That's like, so like, no, like eternity in hell,
Yeah.
And I was like, what? Like I've been fantasizing to avoid my own lust. And when I stopped the fantasy, and like I had to retrain myself. So when I'd start to want to fantasize, I'd be like, no, go in, find the lust. What would happen is I would get that activation of like wild, female, primal, animalistic lust. And I was like, wow, I was trading out that experience, like that raw, beautiful, divine experience for a fantasy. And then like, what did I miss with my partner? So it's so powerful when we retrain ourselves of like, what's underneath the fantasies? What could we have if we had that level of intimacy with our own body?
Yeah.
That's great.
Wow.
Yeah.
Homework.
All right. So the last step in this practice for a man is then, so you're turning yourself on, you're breathing, you're feeling things. If you feel shame, guilt, fear, sadness, story, anything else coming up, attend to it with love, right? So that would be kind of more of the sexual healing path. Like, I love myself. I love this. I'm going to allow it. I'm going to feel it, right? It's a process of feeling the unfelt things. Don't go into a big story around it. Stay in your body. love your penis, love the experience that's happening. And slowly over time, this unravels it and it allows you to stop being controlled by whatever got conditioned in there in a very simple way. This is the most simple practice. The other option is you go into pleasure, right? And so you're starting to get turned on. So again, I would recommend for this practice, not fantasizing, and instead breathing, using your breath to pull the pleasure from your penis into your heart. And to do that for at least 21 breaths. And this is so powerful because one of the kind of core pains of the masculine is this disconnection between heart and penis. And then that's where you get jackrabbit sex or totally disconnected or fantasy, that like you feel it as a woman in your body when that disconnection is there.
Yeah.
And it hurts. And it hurts in a man's body too, but he usually won't feel that until he gets the first connection. And then he realizes what was lost and not having that in the first place. So what happens when you breathe that pleasure up to your heart is that you'll then actually be forming that connection. So the two will start to work in tandem and your heart will come online when you're having sex a lot more often. And then after that, you can just touch yourself to pleasure because what happens, or touch yourself to orgasm or climax if you want, what happens is that you've then shifted things in your nervous system and you'll experience often climax or ejaculation or orgasm. They can all be separate experiences in a different way. And so that's what's also allowing your body to repattern itself after this practice into a new way of orgasming or coming.
It's kind of, I have the image of, in Avatar when they make Sahelu, which is the bond between the animal and the Avatar person, the Na'vi people. And it seems like at that point when that connection is made, then they're one, like they become one with the animal that they're riding, whether it's the dragon or Taruk Makta or whoever, whatever it is. But it's like me and the wolf all of a sudden having Sahelu, my heart and the wolf, my heart and my penis, like forming that bond. And all of a sudden we're together and we're one. And separate, but the same. And like the power of that, when that actually happens, I mean, that's what creates that most powerful state.
And I want to clarify for like the men listening, because I think sometimes we think, oh, my heart's in it, so then it has to be like always sappy sex or really slow.
Like only slow kissing and
we're playing like Boys the Men or whatever, like kind of situation. And like, it's actually the opposite. It's like you can do anything when you have the penis heart connection. The difference is a lot of the time, like any woman who's like sensitive, receptive, connected to herself, she's not going to want most of what you do if it's just penis. When heart and penis are connected, like that's when she wants anything. And there's actually this primal freedom that starts unlocking. Like that's when the wild feels so much better than to the feminine. And like a guy just like fucking in a disconnected way with just his penis, like it's cool, it's okay. As soon as you start opening and connecting to your body, you're like, wow, I only want his wildest, craziest, dirtiest everything when he's got that connection, because when his heart's there,
you feel safe.
Exactly. So it's actually a key to greater wildness with your lovers, even though it feels not intuitive because it's through the heart.
Interestingly, from my own experience, the most I've felt that unity of self has been in power exchange play, even with former partners, because at that point, it's like all I am is one wolf, right? And like everything is aligned. And there's this state where your brain's in, flow state or transient hypofrontality or these other states of consciousness where everything is just unified and it's just the rapture of the moment. But it's required, it's required that intensity for me to get there often until, except in maybe rare occasions and now frequently with Wailana, where there can be both. There can be that wildness that draws in and allows the mind to set back, and my whole heart is in, some deep primal sexual expression. But that was always the thing that I reached for, because what was I really craving? I was craving that point of dissolution, of separation. I was craving being one entity, one being. And that would only express when it was in the most primal state. And then when it wasn't, And even if that wasn't what the situation was really asking for, I was like, then I was a little bit more disjointed. You know, I had enough sensitivity and intuition to know like, all right, this is not where we're going today. But nonetheless, it was more like mechanical almost, because I couldn't form the connection in the softness. I could only form the connection when like the full beast came alive.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, you know, my partners could feel that. And so they would actually crave that aspect of me.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much because that was their fantasy. I'm sure it was in many cases. That is an exciting place to be. But nonetheless, I think what they were really craving, what I was really craving, was the unified self making love to them.
Yeah.
And if that required some power exchange dynamic, and okay, then we're going to go there, because that's when all of Aubrey as one being is making love to me or fucking me.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, really interesting to make all of these connections about like, all right, what have I done? How has it worked? How has it worked with myself? But I've never practiced that with myself, not a single time ever, not once. And I would bet that the majority of the men listening are like, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I've never had that experience by myself.
Yeah.
Ryan, you ever had that experience by yourself? No. It's like,
Are you sure? Amy's going to be so grateful.
Yeah. And the heart's the first stage, right? And then you connect third eye, and then you connect whole body. So it's like this like multi-stage process to get all the way into that unified field in a sexual state.
And then it feels like I just would love to reiterate from the feminine perspective, like how safe that feels to go deep into all the different realms of expression, which can be, you know, like dominant, submissive in all the ways. Like for it to feel safe, if we feel you like fully online and fully connected, it gives us the permission to go deeper. Yeah. And it's like, wow, how extraordinary can sex be when I feel safe enough to do all these wild primal things and let that part of me live.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And that is, it's so sad what has happened, because like in this heavy conditioning of masculine sexuality, right? And this deep disconnection of penis from the rest of the body, from unity consciousness, from heart, like then what happens is women end up mirroring that, like in, you know, a heterosexual partnership with their own performance shut down,
That's
disconnected, feeling unsafe. Yeah.
So I guess I can segue into, if you're complete there, into my own. I've actually had a lot of processing that's happened for me since we have come together. A lot of it's been really beautiful healing of like, wow, I'm really being loved for the first time in a way that's, you know, in our sexual expression. Like I've never been loved before, feelings, you know, in sex. And then there's also these other elements that I've been sort of unraveling fairly recently.
Just to stay with that, I mean, so people understand. Yeah. You've felt like that you've been loved and then fucked, but those were separate.
Very
those were separate expressions.
It didn't feel like they had ever merged. And in my mind, I didn't know the difference. So I always felt like, oh, this is my partner that I'm with. Like when we have sex, it feels, you know, it feels good, but it like, I didn't really understand what being made love to meant until we were intimate, because I cried hysterically. Like I can't believe I've been in my life this long and like never actually like felt this kind of love and surrender. Like there was a grief in that. There was also a celebration, like, wow, I made it. And I'm so grateful to be experiencing this. But it was a very intense moment for me of having that recognition. But, so.
And that's to say, like, it's not like I'm sex Jesus either. Like I haven't even done any of the basic steps, you know, here as well. It's
but
like,
it was a feeling. It's the feeling that like, I am safe with this person because I really, truly feel their deep love and honor and reverence for me. Yeah. I think that's the big thing that I've been unpacking for some time, is a lot of my former choices, you know, with myself, my own levels of discernment where I've transgressed myself, is there wasn't this honor and reverence for my own body and the way that I allowed for, you know, men to be in my body. There's a lot of this, like, you know, I've done a lot of ceremonies to unwind a lot of this so that I could reclaim my full sexual expression, because I still feel it's like I'll just say it. Our sex is wild and extraordinary and freaking amazing. I can also feel it's like there's this part of myself that I'm tuning into that feels it's like I'm not even fully there yet.
Yeah.
Like there are still parts that I am unwinding that I shut down in shame of myself because of how I've participated in very toxic sexuality. Like I had one relationship in particular that was very I'll just call it toxic. And it was that tense, that tension, like push and pull, like I literally can't stand you, but then we have makeup sex and it feels so exciting. And it's like it's like the intense separation and chaos, but then coming back together in some kind of union. But it was like, it was the thing that was feeding the relationship was this toxic sexuality. And that, relationship there was a lot of betrayal and a lot of dishonesty. And I think because I participated in that way with being so drawn to very toxic sexuality, I feel I can tune into my body and feel like I think there's still some aspect of me that's a little bit shut down because it's like my body, my yoni doesn't trust me. Like I've been through ceremonies where, ayahuasca and other ceremonies where I've had to really be with, like really go deep into how I have been with former partners and people that weren't my partners and all these ways that there was no sacredness in sex whatsoever. There were elements of, being performative. There were, the toxic draws and all these different things that I've actually felt my body as its own entity, feeling unsafe with me and my discernment and my choices. So a lot of what you were saying, prior to this, and even with the practices that you were offering for the masculine, like for the feminine, which I can imagine that there could be things that are really similar to what you offered for the masculine, but like how to like fully reclaim and be in my authority and reclaim my sexuality. Cause it's already like this, being in this partnership I've explored things I never thought possible in ways that I get excited and turned on, and all these novel things that I'm getting to experience that are so exciting, and deep love making, like it's been all the expression has been in just all over the place, but I still feel like I'm not fully, like I know that there's even more. And so I would love, and I think for a lot of women, because they aren't honoring of themselves, they're not loving themselves in a way that they have boundaries to be like, no, this isn't healthy for me. This isn't right for me. I'm not just going to do it because you want me to, or because that's how I feel like maybe you'll like me, or all those stories. Like for women who feel dissociated from their own pleasure or who feel performative, like it feels like the scientific formula for going into sex. It's like, okay, well, like I have to come because then they're going to come. But I think for a lot of women, they think, well, I gotta do it or fake it because then he's got to do it. And it's just like, that's like what sex is. It's just like fully disconnected. And I've definitely in my past felt that way, following that very toxic relationship where I think I just began to dissociate from my own pleasure. So for women who feel dissociated from their yoni and the power of it and the honoring of it and the reverence for it, how do we reclaim our sexuality to be in its full expression?
I'm so happy you asked.
Orgasms for everyone.
Yay.
That made me sweat.
Yeah, so it's such a similar process, and like I love, like one of the things I love about, these conversations is like asking me to break it down into this like very granular, like, no, but really, like, how would you, like car mechanic style, like, what do you want me to do to my pussy?
How to, yeah.
And so I'll just say like in the biggest level, like, that like I've spent 18 years creating that body of work for women and men, but with like a deep passion for women. And just like, having a crystal egg practice, like a jade egg practice, having a sex magic practice, having your own pleasure practice, right? So important, because as like I love what you've just articulated, so much of it. And like, you can have a partner who's so in love with you, you're having the most amazing sex, and still there's these pieces that are about your relationship to yourself.
Yeah.
Right? That like my relationship to my past, my relationship to my pussy. And so again, it's like that individual practice is so important alongside a couple's practice, or just on your own if you don't have a partner, because then you're still upgrading your sexuality along the way. So you're a better match to someone with a more upgraded sexuality.
Yeah.
So
that's an important, like, let that sit for a second. Like, if you're doing the work to upgrade your own sexuality and your intimacy with yourself, you're like a vibrational match for better sexuality with other. That's really, really important to check.
So important. Yes. And so important to really claim that when you're single, when you don't have a partner, or even within partnership. Like, I've worked with partners that have been together like 15 years, and they'll take 30 days to do their own practice, to find themselves again after 15 years, to really do their own work and then come back as a different match. But yeah, we tend to think like when we're out in the dating world, it's like, okay, I'm waiting for a partner to open my sexuality, versus like, what am I doing in my own body to connect to my pussy, to connect to my heart, to up level my entire sexuality. So like, that's what I can say yes to in the future. Like, so important. So for women, it's, oh my God, it's so many things. And what's fascinating is we could basically walk through the exact same process, right?
Yeah.
Like having a 15-minute pleasure practice. I really love for women to use something like a crystal egg, which is like an egg-shaped. It can be borosilicate glass, it can be jade, it can be made as long as it's a body-safe material. Or I actually really recommend that women, if they're in heterosexual partnerships, use like a body safe dildo when they self-pleasure, because this is like if we were talking about vibrators earlier, being like stimulating your body and creating those neural pathways in a way that you are then unable to receive pleasure with a partner usually, something like self-pleasuring with a dildo actually mirrors the kind of like experience with a partner. So you're creating those pathways of learning how to be orgasmic through penetration, learning how to be orgasmic with a penis inside of you, learning how to be orgasmic like deep inside of your vagina versus just using your external clitoris. So again, it's sort of thinking very consciously about every single time I touch myself, like, what am I creating in my body? And doing that again, like, how do I want to feel towards my pussy, right? It's so normal. Like the first time I looked at my pussy in the mirror, I was like, oh, monstrosity. I was like, oh, like, I was just like, I was horrified, it was crazy. And like, I was like, how does anyone find that attractive? And I was like, oh my God, we got to work on this. Right. So like, and this is how a lot of women feel when they look at them, and they're like, it smells weird. It looks weird. Who could ever want it? Like they can, and it's like, no, like straight dudes want pussy. Like they actually find it very sexy, And so
he thinks it's beautiful.
I do.
It's very healing.
Totally. So like fight, like how, like what emotional tone, right? Because even that simplicity of like, wow, looking at my vulva and what actually comes up, like, is it fear? Is it shame? Is it something needs to be different? Is it's not good enough? Is it like all of that? Is it I smell weird? Like, what is the actual feeling? And again, just like having a relationship to like an actual cat, like it's good to, like, I like thinking of it as a kitten, because I'm like, how would I treat a kitten? Would I be like, you're fucked up, you look weird, there's something wrong with you, you smell? Would I be like,
oh,
come here, baby. Yeah. Like it's like she hears you, Like she is you, so she's responsive to that kind of relationship. So like, okay, what kind of emotional tone do I want to feel? How do I go in there with that emotional tone? Like I'm committing to a new relationship. And a lot of women feel that sorrow that you described and like not having felt it before. I call that the ocean of sadness. And like, it's part of I have not yet come across a person that didn't at some point hit the ocean of sadness. And for women, it's like, what's been lost? in us doing that to ourselves, what's been lost in not having boundaries, in toxic choices, in forgetting the magic and beauty of our own pussies. And like when you feel what's really there, you also can grieve what's lost for yourself and then the whole fucking planet, you know?
Yeah.
And so like feeling that is so important. And I think sometimes we go a little bit down the journey, and if you haven't done that level of work and all of a sudden you just want to like sob, you know, in sex, it can be like, oh my God, I'm doing something wrong, versus like, no, you're doing something right. Like, like find the ocean of sadness, because it means that you're starting to know that you deserve differently and that we all deserve differently, and that there was ever a choice.
Yeah.
Let's just, for people who don't understand what you do with the jade egg, or how you use a dildo differently than how the men have been using their penis on you, if you've been in unconscious sexual experiences, like what is it from just a, you know, really mechanical standpoint? Like what are you actually doing? Where do you put the egg? What do you do? How do you use the dildo?
Right. So you put the egg in your vagina.
I got that part. But some people might be like, I don't know.
We don't know. You'd be surprised how people are like, in the anus. I'm like, no. You can literally go all the way up into your body. Do not do that. Okay. So you must always have a base in anything that you put up your anus.
That's good to know.
Lessons.
I didn't know that.
Important guideline.
A crystal egg. So again, it can be made of many different types of materials. Jade is the traditional one in the Taoist tradition. But as long as it's body safe, you put it up your vagina. And what's so cool about it is that it's a kind of practice where people are like, oh, do Kegels, you know? And you're like, when are you going to ever do Kegels unless you actually like have a kind of thing that you go and do that you're connected to? So you can think of it like a crystal egg, like having a yoga mat. Like if someone was like, you know what, you should do downward dog, you should do pranayama, but there wasn't like a place to go and do it. Like when would you ever do it? And when did you just be casually like, oh shit, I'm going to do my pranayama now? Like it's like we as humans, we need something to connect to as like, this is my practice. So what I love about the crystal eggs is like they are a practice that you're like, oh, I'm going to put this egg inside my vagina, and now I'm going to do pelvic floor strengthening work. I'm going to do emotional release work. I'm going to do sexual healing. So you can think of it kind of as having a yoga practice for your vagina, where you're literally breathing into the egg. There's all kinds of different practices. So I can give you like an example of one. It's called like 1, 2, 3 bliss. It's a Taoist practice. And so you'd put the egg inside your vagina and you squeeze your pelvic floor and you release, and you squeeze your pelvic floor and you release. Like one of the few scientifically proven ways to have a better orgasm is to have a stronger pelvic floor, but also you want to have a relaxed pelvic floor. So you're not just trying to build strength because you'll get tightness. You want strength and relaxation at the same time. Then you can actually squeeze around the egg and release, squeeze around the egg and release. And then you go up and you focus right around your cervical area and you squeeze above, and you actually move the pleasure up through into your heart. So you're learning to turn your vagina into a pleasure channel that shoots pleasure into your heart. This is also how, like, if you've heard, you know, like giving him a hand job with your vagina, like this is how you would train yourself to do such a thing. And again, you're not going to be sitting around just being like, I'm going to learn how to give a hand job with my vagina. Like you need a practice, right? Yeah. So the crystal egg like gives you this practice of like, wow. And again, it's like you can see how like these sexual experiences we crave, like we can work on them, like you know, riding a penis on top, and you want that full body release, right? It's like, so you do a practice like that, like 1, 2, 3 bliss with the egg inside, and you're like, okay, I can squeeze my pelvic floor. I can squeeze deep inside my vagina. I'm training myself to have pleasure and sensitivity in these areas. So I'm actually orgasmic in my cervical area, which a lot of women, if they don't train themselves to do that, they have compacted psychosomatic tension from fear, shame, guilt, trauma, too hard of penetration before they were ready. And slowly over time, the cervical area contracts and creates pain. So that's why the cervix is often thought of as like a painful area for most women. But when you do work to release that tension and pain, just like getting a really good deep tissue massage, and then your body's open and your body starts to feel pleasurable instead of painful, you can do the same thing with your sexual physiology. So then you're squeezing at the top of the egg and you're learning to shoot that pleasure into your heart and then your third eye. So when you're actually making love, it's like you're training training your body to take the pleasure into all these areas, and that creates that full body experience. So that's just like one tiny practice that you would do with a crystal egg. There's a whole methodology behind it that's so incredible. But even that one practice, you can see how that would train you to have deeper, better, more powerful sex.
It seems, I use the metaphor of, the wolf for my penis or the other little guy in the sidecar, and and it seems like, there's a way in which, from a functional standpoint, a lot of women have thought about their sexuality, their pussy, their attraction as this kind of almost spider web. Like I'm going to catch a man. I'm going to catch a man's attention with this thing. And if I give him this thing, it'll trap him. It'll trap him in the web, right? Because I'll hook into his pleasure. I'll hook into his, and it's this very kind of reductionist functional standpoint instead of this is like a living, breathing honey hive, birthing hive of God.
Yeah.
That's here, you know. And of course, if someone gets access to this, this is the sacred place, right? This is a very special thing that I'm offering. It's not just a trap.
Yeah.
It's not just a web that's going to capture something and get what I want, what my mind wants, which may be love, which may be safety, which may be desire, which may be validation, which may be all of these things. Like I'm going to use this to get something.
Yeah.
But let's be like using a part of you instead of being in relationship with it and honoring that part of you.
Yeah. And we can only really understand like why women do that, like by understanding what patriarchy did to them, which is like instead of having a supportive tribe, like a fully intact family, like people who raise your child with you, like for thousands of years, for most of us, it was like your entire survival, your children's survival, you having any access to wealth, any access to power is all through a man. And the moment you don't have a man in society, like you couldn't even have a checking account on your own in the United States without your husband sign off in the 1970s in like certain places. Like it's just hard to understand like what that kind of experience will do to a woman. So like instead of feeling like my sexuality is my own, like our grandmothers didn't have that kind of privilege 100 years ago. They were like, my husband can't leave me at all costs, right? Like, and so that sort of, it's like to unwind that is to also like come back into our sovereignty as women of like, my God, like, yeah, I'm sitting on this like ocean of gems and like everlasting, like abundant gold, right? And to know that, it's so important to have that connection to our own magnificence, because if you don't have that, how can you sustain such an incredible partnership, right? The terror of losing it becomes too strong, and true love is terrifying.
So fear-based.
So having that internal relationship to your own sexuality actually helps you have a more powerful partnership, because when you're trying to trap from a spider web, it's like it like how can you then have this like elevated, magnificent relationship? And it's fine to have the spider web because I think relationships include everything. But no, like it's like I feel I come across so many women that are terrified of letting go of that kind of trapping mentality and claiming their own power because they're like, oh, I'll be alone, someone won't be attracted to me, versus like, no, when you have that pillar of your own radiance, like that's actually when we all know that falling in love is terrifying and having like really incredible partnership is terrifying. You can withstand that terror and choose the love when you have that relationship to self and sexuality and beauty.
And you have the magnetism to attract what it is you actually want.
Totally.
And it's like I love that you mentioned that just about the collective healing that's happening too. It's like, if any one of us has that level of healing, like that's in the collective, that's in the collective pie. So it's like, that's how things start to shift, but it starts with every one of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's this interesting dynamic, which is mirrored in all of nature. It's the Red Queen effect, right? Like women using their sexuality as a spider web, men get excellent at disentangling themselves from spider webs and preventing themselves from getting stuck. And then so you get even stronger spider webs and even stronger, jailbreakers of like the things like, I'm not going to get trapped. And so in that paradigm, it's actually just creating more and more of the same, but it's never going to actually work. Right? Like you're just breeding a better escape artist from the thing that you're trying to do. And so
Yeah.
you get a better spider web, and then you get a better escape artist, and then you're in this constant chase, but you're never actually finding the real fulfillment or healing.
Healing anything, yeah. And that's an important, like, I could see what you're saying as potentially being maybe triggering for women, but I think, or maybe not, maybe I'm totally off. However,
I felt a little triggered.
I could see that, and I know you, so I know it comes from the most loving place, but it also is like really important to reflect on, of like being in integrity with self, of like, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
Am I being true to me? Am I being, that's that level of discernment and boundary where, how he's describing it is actually what I was doing because I wanted to feel love.
Yeah.
So I was opening myself to penetration into a person to come into my energy field in my body because I wanted to feel love, because I want, like all the conditioning that we have as women.
Yeah.
And ancestral and just collective conditioning for so long, that's patterned. So like, if I actually had that as a tool, as much as at first I was like, oh wow, that's an interesting thing to say. If I like could actually look at it like that, it's actually really helpful. Like, am I using my yoni as a spider web right now?
Yeah.
Or am I loving it and being in tune with it like a kitten?
Yeah.
And as a man, am I using this letting out my heart and showing some sign of love as a way to gain access to the yoni, right?
Yeah.
And this is the same kind of spider mentality of like, oh, I love you, baby. Oh, yeah, now, all right, great. Now you're going to give me access to your pussy, right? And so, and these are these things that we may not even realize that we're doing, but we're driven towards this. And I think that's a very common toxic expression of the masculine. It could happen that a man's like, look at this dick, like this is the thing. I know you want this dick, but that's like kind of a joke. It's like that Paul Rudd joke. It's like, it doesn't happen as
dick up in your vag.
But we all use ways to kind of use our sexuality or use some aspect of ourselves to get sexuality. But all of this is a form of usury rather than union.
Yeah.
And it's not any judgment. We've all participated in all aspects of this in every way possible. And sometimes it's love, sometimes it's financial support, sometimes it's leverage, sometimes it's all of this is, a big part of the toxicity that, enshrouds it. When really this is something of two empowered people coming together, union for union's sake. Like that's the highest articulation. But I think it's helpful to be mindful of like, all right, we've all stepped in places where we're in a usury standpoint.
Yeah,
totally. And just where like you give up, like for me, like one of the things that I really looked at this entire year is like, where have I given up and betrayed myself time and time again in relationship or with sexuality because I desperately wanted love or to be chosen or to be good enough. Like what do I make more important than like my own sovereignty and my own truth? And that's that like it's like when we say like, oh my God, self-love is so important, right? But it really is that thing of like, I love myself so much that I will get out of the lie that like dishonoring myself truly gets me what I want.
Yeah.
That like it's more important to sit in self-honor and like then trust that comes in a real way rather than like play in that field. And that's such a process. Like I'm still in that process of being like, oh shit, look, I self-abandoned again. Like I wanted love or I wanted, I like literally for me, it's like being chosen or not being abandoned.
Same.
And like wanting to like be like, and instead of remembering how sovereign and how whole and how beautiful I am, I'm like, okay, I'll just give up. I'll give up whatever felt sacred or important to me and trade it. And so for me, it's like it's like having the honesty with myself of like, where do I trade my truth? Because I feel like something's more important than my own truth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think we talked about it a little bit beforehand, but this other aspect of the deep fear that has been in the male mind around an empowered woman's sexuality, right? I mean, this has been something that men have been terrified of because the ability to access these deeper states of consciousness and magic. I mean, we use the word magic and I'm sure we'll get into it. it's been something that's terrified men who are disconnected from their heart, disconnected from all of that feminine aspect of sensation and all of these things that we're talking about. They're like, no, let's cut that out and let's condense, the feminine to some kind of propertization. Like this is some form of property. And this is a mindset for so long and so actively repressed.
Yeah.
And there's this beautiful now awakening and reclaiming of that. But it still takes a man with the courage to look into that immense power and be like, whoa.
Yeah.
And really honor it and revere it.
And don't you think maybe, I mean, this is just my feeling about it, but it's like, when you're like in total poverty mentality and you want to do something big and you look at someone with like $100 million who's really successful and like all like if you're really repressing it in yourself, like all you like want to do is stop them or make them play small so you don't have to face the pain of every choice you ever made.
Yeah.
It's like, I feel like there's this story of like men are afraid of these powerful women, but aren't they just afraid of their own divine magnificence? And I feel like women, it's almost slightly, this is what I've seen in sacred sexuality. It's slightly easier in the beginning for women to open into that. Like it's still, there's a lot of like shame and conditioning and all of that. But for a woman to be like, holy shit, I'm full of sexual magic and full body orgasm. And this is a pillar to the divine and my pussy is the goddess. And like, wow, right? Like I'd say like, give me 3 hours, and like, we'll get there, With a man, it's like, give me 3 months, to like get all the way there. Not every man, but it's like, there's this like process of like really getting in there. The magnificence is the same. Like the power is the same. It's its own power. But I almost feel sometimes that like men have bought into that same lie of like 2-dimensional sexuality, watching porn, turning the, like I have this tantric mentor I love, Ernest Morrow, and he says like, turning the ocean of a woman into a swimming pool, right? Or like the solarity of a man into a grow lamp, right? Like I'll stay small, but you have to stay small with me because otherwise it's going to trigger all of these like bargains that I made that I didn't really want to make. I didn't even know I made them. So sometimes I feel like a man staring into like the sexual magnificence of a powerful woman and like, we haven't trained him to be like, she is an invitation into my fucking greatness if I would let her be. Instead, they're like, oh, she's going to eat me. It's like, bitch, we don't want to eat you. Like, we want to be on a planet full of kings. Like, sometimes we don't give women enough credit. They're like, oh, those angry feminists. I'm like, do you know what we've been through? And we're like, water under the bridge, my friend. Like, we just want to do our work. We want you to be magnificent. We want us to be magnificent. We all just want to grow together. And like, a couple thousand years of like trauma and pain, like, let's all just like turn into our divine selves. Like, that's what awakened women really want. And so I feel like this like story of fear as well. It's like, wow, she's just the goddess inviting you into your power. But it's trading out that small story, that attachment to being a grow lamp, because you can control a grow lamp and being like, holy shit, I was always the uncontrollable sun.
Yeah, absolutely. This is to be with that, you really have to be willing to almost like humble yourself to where you're at. And just not try to control it, not have to always be in control. Like, and this is something that anything that men have done to women, they've also done to themselves. Yeah. Because the place that we're all trying to get to is a place where both of us, both men and women are using each other as springboards to the divine articulation. Yeah. And when we're making anybody small, we're making ourselves small because we're demanding it. We're not having that other equal force that can actually bring us into this. So the patriarchy has been as costly to men in many psycho-spiritual, emotional ways as it has been to women. Women have just borne the brunt of it in very particular vicious ways and many times and sometimes very violent ways that men haven't had to deal with. But the psychological trauma of this mindset, it runs deep in all of us.
Totally. And there's this, it's like when I've seen porn and like seen the way that women are treated, it's like, I literally just want to be like, do you know what it would mean if you knew she was a fucking goddess.
Mm.
You know? Do you know what that would do for you? Like who you would get to be, you know, what we would all get to be. And that, like, yeah, it's for her, but it's for you just as much, you know? And like, I'm reminded of, I had a tantric teacher who would talk about like when we would learn how to do energy orgasm practices, and like the whole audience could sit in like a woman's awakening, right? Into her full, like ecstatic, full blown body orgasm. And when a man would start to crack, like the level of like sorrow and pain, and like people like couldn't be with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's so fascinating to me that like, yeah, for the last few thousand years, totally would rather been a man, like hands down. Like, I don't care. Like we're both fucked up inside, but like, I'd still rather have like social, economic, political power and like be the one like in control 100%. Now with all of this freedom, it's so delightful. It's so freaking delightful to be a woman. And there is something to that, of this pain body that's being carried. And like we've all gone there. And I think it's just not being shared how sexually magnificent and divine men really are and can be, that they have this like full spectrum beauty to their sexuality that is just as rich as a woman's. And like, we have to get there together, because, you know, we don't want to be a whole bunch of like goddesses and high priestesses just being like, and there's just a whole bunch of unconscious, like still in his trauma kind of pain. Like we want to like do this together.
Yeah. And I think going back to pornography or any kind of utilization of sexuality for a purpose, it's really challenging to actually use your sexuality in that way. I mean, I think you can see that same type of thing. I'm going to put on this performative act in, you know, the most degrading way to myself, because it's going to get me a higher dollar amount for this particular thing, or it's going to get me booked on more. And it's the most kind of, it's this condensation of that energy of like, use this for this purpose type of thing. That's, you know, it's got to be deeply challenging. And I think it's, you know, something you can see in a, you know, exotic dancer. It's not necessarily the dancing on the pole, but it's the lap dances, you know. And I've known dancers, and I've had partners who were, former dancers, and it was the deep, like, that was where the pain was, that I'm giving you something that you, because I want this thing from you in return, rather than like, let's celebrate this together. And it's not any judgment on that path. We've all, as I said, we've all been our own porn stars, and we've all been our own dancers in our own different ways, using whatever we have to get what we want in the world. So like, there cannot be, if you start to judge at any point, like just stop, because you're not looking deeply enough in yourself to see where you've done the exact same shit in a different way.
Totally.
So like, leaving all that aside, but just kind of recognizing, and then making a choice. Like, do we want to participate in this energetically? You know, or do we want to not participate in it? Not with judgment, but with lack of participation and love, and a hand that says, anytime you're ready, like, here's another path. And
and if there's an ocean of sadness in men that I've often seen, it's like, wow, I turned a goddess into a dehumanized object for my own egoic satisfaction, because I lied to myself and told myself that I was just an ego rather than the divine as well. And there's an ocean of sadness there that I feel like our culture is just starting to touch.
Yeah, it runs deep in both. So you get into a partnership, you come with all of these challenges, you come with all of these things. Now we got a good roadmap for the self practices alone. But you get in partnership, and now a whole new world opens up. And, you know, Wailana and I have seen this, how we've been able to really heal each other in very deep ways, and also have amazing adventures and transcendental states that have emerged from our sexual exploration. You know, so what are some of the things that, you know, first of all, let's talk about the challenges, like, I think, in relationship, you know, challenges that people seem to have most commonly. And I'll offer one challenge. And I think one challenge is that when you have this very reduced form of sexuality, then you need novelty to kind of spring you into excitement, which springs you into presence, which is, I think, why novelty is so exciting, is because you're present. When you're on a date with somebody new, you don't look at your phone, you don't think about, so if you're into it, you're fucking into it and you're there, and presence is the magic itself.
Yeah.
But you're using novelty as this crude instrument to bring you into this state. And so, I think that's I think there's virtue to all different paths, monogamy, poly, all of these different things. But the novelty is kind of, it's effective, but it's like a crude instrument that requires constant re-updating of that thing, because novelty ultimately gives way to taking something for granted. And so I think there has to be deeper ways, and I know there are because we're exploring them, but deeper ways to create this, hierogamy, as Jamie Wheel said, where you're actually in a partnership and actually creating new forms of novelty and new different levels. Because I think that sense of monotony and that sense of this is just all fizzled out. Like, I think that's the beast that I think a lot of people face in relationship. And then the solution being, all right, maybe we'll go poly and then just use novelty and continually spin novelty. It's effective, but it's a very difficult path. And it also just keeps you stuck in a loop, using like the most crude instrument to get you to where you want to go, which is presence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, I love that. I think it's super relevant. And I see kind of two big challenges for especially long-term couples. The first is like, when sex is, as we've kind of articulated, almost this like two-dimensional, like you got to come, I got to come, hopefully around the same time, hopefully quick enough, hopefully like, in exactly the right order of the way things are supposed to happen. It's like, how many times are you going to do that before you're like, this is boring as shit? Yeah.
like watching Forrest Gump for like every single day for forever.
Totally. And a lot of that comes from this like, yeah, like sex is like A plus B equals pleasure, then equals coming at the same time, right? It's like, it's so reductionist. And so when you open into tantric sexuality, sacred sexuality, and it becomes so much more of what we've been discussing, right? You can access higher states of consciousness, right? It's like taking plant medicine, but it's in your like sexual activity. That's endlessly fascinating.
Yeah.
Like it's so engaging, right?
What's that? What, I can never remember how the hyperfrontal, what is it called?
Transient hypofrontality.
Yeah, that is real. I think you should explain that, because that's an exciting.
Well, Layla can probably explain it, but there's been clinical studies that when you're in a dominant submissive role, the dominant gets in a classic flow state. So like Csikszentmihalyi's classic flow state of like really like locked into presence, alpha frequencies in your brain waves and all of the neurochemical cocktails.
Yeah.
For the submissive, they actually enter a slightly different state called transient hypofrontality. So temporarily, you're getting less blood and less focus on the prefrontal cortex, which is the part that's thinking, the part that tracks time. So you enter this state of deep timelessness where you're just in like, where am I? What time is it? What is going, like, whoa, I'm on another planet.
And it's shutting off, like what you were saying earlier, it's shutting off all those elements of needing to control or fantasize, or like you're so present in the moment. Yeah. And then it literally feels like being high afterwards. Like it's kind of like, well, I'm not going anywhere because I feel very high and very relaxed and very present.
Yes. And like, we could do that forever. Yeah. Like I'm like, sign me, like we like, of course I could do that like every day and never get tired of it. Right. Yeah. And so what's happening is this, it's literally compression in your sexual experience, but it's compression in your nervous system, right? Because we actually, with the way we're conditioned in sex, we're pushing ourselves into the prefrontal cortex, away from that state by being like, do I look perfect enough? Am I gonna come fast enough? Do I smell okay? Am I performing? Like all of this conditioning is shoving us straight into the judging, critical, discerning part of our minds, which is the opposite of presence or that deep state of beingness, right? Like the reduction, the hypo, I don't know the word.
Transient hypofrontality.
Transient hypofrontality. That's what I've basically been training people to do for a long time. I'm so happy there's a word for it.
Yay! I can never remember it, but it's awesome. I'm like, I'm doing that.
Maybe because
I'm
every
doing that
time
thing
you're
again.
there.
What is it called?
That thing again. It's so good.
Because every time you're there, you don't have access to words.
Exactly.
Like,
which is what you're craving, right? So it's like, wow, those kinds of experiences, like if we're cultivating that, as a couple, well, that's something you can engage in with a lifetime, like over a lifetime, just like meditation, just like yoga. And yeah, your practice ebbs and flows. Like you'll still go through cycles as a couple of like how much desire you have, how much sex you're having, but you can stay engaged because you're essentially doing something that can engage you for a lifetime. Anything that's simple and formulaic, everybody gets bored of. The other way that we're like really compressing sex into two-dimensional reality is by making it only about climax, right? Or only about this kind of like egoic satisfaction of like, okay, are we having enough sex to stay together, right? Like a kind of fear-based experience. And again, I love how you always bring in so much of the compassion and understanding, like how we've done all of this, all of us. Like, so there's no shame in it. Just really understanding what it can do to our relationships. And in that compressing, we forget sexual healing. We forget like the rich dimension of emotionality. We forget that when we get out of prefrontal cortical control, we wake up archetypal reality, right? So that's when there's like all these states of play with like the force of fire, the force of dominance, the force of submission, the force of goddess consciousness, right? And so playing in those realms is also it's so fascinating. And so you can see how like, of course, couples are bored with sex, right? So that's one thing. And the other thing is that I really do feel that intimate long-term partnership is designed to take you home to yourself, which means that things are going to come up. And if you don't see your partnership as a healing container in which to resolve and address that which keeps you from your truth, your spiritual awakening, coming home to yourself, and is specifically designed to show you your blocks to intimacy, your childhood issues, things like that, what will happen is you'll subtly, because so many of us are carrying this idea, like relationships should be just happily ever after, magical all the time, happy all the time. So if you're not looking at your relationship as a container that's designed to wake you up and take you home and willing to see those arising pieces that are there to teach you, the most natural thing to do is be like, I'm not supposed to be feeling miserable right now, or my intimacy blocks, or depressed, or whatever it is that's coming up. Shut down, shut down, shut down. And what happens is we numb out to our partner because we don't actually understand the natural alchemy of two people is to bring each other home. And if we're not understanding that, and instead we're carrying the mentality of this should just feel good all the time, I should just feel in love all the time. Like love looks like everything, right? Not just like a warm, fuzzy feeling in every moment. And so when we're doing that to our partnerships, the only thing to do is to numb out to the healing experience that wants to happen between us. Or you could think of it as an awakening experience, because it's not just taking you to the pain, it's also trying to take you to ecstasy or trying to take you home to yourself. And so in partnership, when there's that awareness, partnership has the capacity to keep going and getting deeper and deeper and deeper and more generative.
There's a problem with our stories too. You know, I mean, everybody has the story that ends with, you know, challenge, 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 obstacle, 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 and then union.
Yeah.
You know, like desire plus obstacle equals passion. I forget who said that.
Yeah.
Right? But it's like, oh, there's this obstacle, Romeo and Juliet obstacle. One's a Montague, one's a Capulet.
Yeah.
Or she's in this tower and you have to fight the things and get the tower. Or he's what a obstacle, and there's all this passion. Then they get together and then all the bells ring and all the, you know, medieval confetti comes down or whatever rice it is or whatever it is. And then all of a sudden it's like all good. But then what happens after happily ever after, right? Like that story is, the movie ends and the story ends there. Like,
and you're like,
they
oh shit,
made
I'm 14.
Exactly. Yeah. So you, in this idea that you make it, and once you make it, it's supposed to be all good, and nobody ever tells the rest of the story. But that's just the beginning. Like, congratulations, you made it.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
You know, but then, all right, what is the consciousness that needs to come in? What is the story? And then what are the tools? What are the things that we actually do? And this is the part that I've really had the hardest time with a lot of the conventional kind of relationship talking voices out there. They'll like say things like, put on a wig and, you know, pretend that you're the janitor. And like, how long is that going to work?
Totally.
You know, oh, you're staying late at the schoolhouse. I was just going to come clean the desks. You know, like, sure, have fun, do a role play, but is that going to really?
It works approximately once.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you're like, I'm bored with the janitor. And then, you know, like.
It's not, it doesn't have the substance. It's hollow. It's like doing, you know, some kind of empty ceremony in church where you're like, I do the thing and we do the thing and we say the thing thing, but we don't feel anything. And it's not a bridge to God.
Yeah.
It's just doing the damn thing and mixing it up. Sure, I don't mind a wig, and role playing can be fun, and this whole thing is great, but it doesn't have the power.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the power to create the desired result that you're looking for. And then you start, what I appreciate about someone like yourself or someone like Jamie Wheel, who just wrote Recapture the Rapture, he's like, all right, here's some tools, you know, and these are going a little deeper. And these are some things that are a little bit more interesting that actually have the power to create this type of hierarchy, to try to create this union where there is no boredom and you don't need, you know, the novelty is created internally within the construct of your relationship through the practices that you have.
Yes.
Rather than just continually reaching for the next shiny object.
Yeah. Well, and in a way, it's like learning to meditate, right? Because if you sit by yourself and you don't meditate or you're brand new to it, it's boring as shit. And you're constantly looking for novelty and you don't want to sit there, right? So there's this form of like, when you learn to be with yourself, it becomes like it's indescribable, right? You're not bored anymore. You're there. And there's kind of a similar quality to relationship because we've been given so many stories about what relationship's supposed to be, who we are supposed to be. Again, it lacks that quality of being able to sit in relationship in such a way that it becomes endlessly fascinating. And that doesn't mean that it has to last forever, but it means like if that is true, then it could, right? And still be fascinating. And the other thing that I was exploring really deeply, do you know the pre-trans fallacy, like Ken Wilber's work?
Mm-mm.
Okay. So this is the thing that I came to, right? We have the happily ever after story in relationships, right? We're just like,
yeah.
You found the prince, congratulations, go make babies and you're going to be happy forever, right? But then we also have the like, marriage is awful and everyone hates each other. Or you have to
compromise and
you have to work super hard all the time, right? And so like, as I was kind of navigating my own long-term relationship and I was like, but surely there's something other than this, right? That it's like, oh, happily ever after isn't true. But then you just have to slog it through, right? And like do the hard work the rest of your life. And yeah, be in the meditation retreat where you're just like, you know, making it work kind of thing. And so what I was looking at is I was like, there's something else that I don't feel our culture has articulated. And a lot of kind of relationship guidance is actually, in my experience, more at the point of marriage is hell. And so like, you got to learn good communication. You got to buy the wigs. You got to like do the work. And I'm glad someone's at least saying that to people.
But that's like the teaching point is coming with that assumption.
Yeah. Like, and you do have to do the work, right? And like as a like in a fully juvenile state, like people are like, oh, I'm going to get into a relationship. It's going to be amazing. It's like, no, you're going to either have done so much work on your own and bring that to the relationship, or you're going to do work together and probably some mix of both, right? And not that your relationship is supposed to be some sort of like therapy session constantly, but we know that like to really be in it, you have to show up for the process. But the thing that I was looking at is like, we kind of lost the like what is that soulful mystical communion that like you two experienced? We don't even have a real articulation for that in our culture. We don't even have a language for it to describe it. So the thing, and then there's also this huge suspicion of like the honeymoon period, right? You're like, oh, you get this like amazing cocktail of hormones and then you're going to hate each other in like 8 months, you know?
It keeps getting better and better.
And with the couples I know that like have this like magical soul communion, it does get better, but nobody really talks about that. So I was like, what the hell is that? Like what, like why, like what's going on? So the thing that I sort of was exploring in myself is, so Ken Wilber has this theory. He taught it about spirituality. It's kind of controversial, but it's called the pre-trans fallacy. We're basically like early stage spirituality, which is like magical thinking and like I'll buy a couple of crystals and then I'll become a millionaire and like all of that can look a certain, it's like energy is real, but it's sort of like it can look very magical, right? But there's a certain consciousness that's not there in it. So then you do the work, you do the meditation, you do all the retreats, you really like get into it, right? And then let's say in the pre-state, you're pretty like freewheeling and expressed because everything's magical, right? And then you get really serious in that like middle state and you're doing all the work and you're doing the integration. And then you wake up and you're like, holy shit, the universe is full of magic. And like, maybe this crystal, like, you know, like you're not in magical thinking anymore, but you're connected to the beauty of the universe and you're pretty freewheeling. So it's this idea that like a pre-state can look very similar to a trans state on the outside, but the consciousness of the person is different. It can be similar to like emotion, like the emotions of a child, right? Just like expressing all over. And then you have to learn to integrate your emotions, be in harmony with them, give them a safe space. And then you can actually become a very emotionally expressed person. So like I can look like a child sometimes in my anger, in my bliss, in my like joy for life, but the integration is there. So I'm not like lashing out at someone for stealing my toy, but I can healthily express my anger. So the pre-state looks like the trans, but the consciousness makes the difference. So the thing that I was looking at is like, what if the honeymoon state isn't all bullshit? Like, what if the seed is there in that recognition, in that cosmic seeing of each other? And my love coach, Annie Lala, who I have so much respect for. So basically, when you first find each other in that state, that seed is there. Like the possibility is there for the blossoming of the truest love. And it can be illusory, right? Like some people feel that experience and you're like, oh, that was a toxic narcissist, like never mind, right? But sometimes that state is pointing to something so real. However, my belief is because in our culture we have lacked the level of work that's required to sustain it and to actually realize it into its fullest form. So like, I feel like you two found your way there by doing a tremendous amount of personal work ahead of time, right? And like really getting to that ability where you could take that sacred falling in love state and actually allow it through the power of your integration and work to realize into its highest possibility, right? And so the trans state of being deeply in love, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years on can look similar to the pre-state of falling in love. But the pre-state is before you've like done the work, integrated. And so sometimes it falls apart, sometimes it doesn't. You have to have that middle state to be able to sustain it. So I just love that because then there's like this, I've just seen how much there's this dismissal, like almost like true love doesn't exist.
Oh yeah. Like, oh, it's just the honeymoon phase. Like, like who are you to speak on anything? You've been together for this long.
Totally. Rather than being like that thing is real.
Yeah.
But what do we have to do and who do we have to become to have the blessing of realizing that in the everyday?
Yeah.
It seems like what we're talking about is it's the crude instrument of novelty will create the presence that we're actually seeking, but eventually the crude instrument fails.
Yes.
Like that which got you to the place will not get you to where you're going. And then you have to start employing some more subtle tools and some different practices to be able to maintain that state of presence and that state of rapture. And but that toolkit isn't taught. So everybody just looks at the aggregate, and you can look at the limerence phase and you have words for it, and you can look at Dr. Wednesday Martin's work and watch how sexual interest declines, and then in the aggregate for women it falls off a cliff, and for men it's a steady decline. And then you get the old timers at the wedding saying marriage is about compromise and it's about commitment and it's about all this shit, and they're like, their heart's not in it, but it's like, all right, this is like, how do you make a business partnership work, not about how do you sustain that vibrant, vivacious honeysuckle of joy with your partner. But because the tools just we're not aware of them. We don't know it's possible. We haven't told the story that it's possible, and people haven't seen that it's possible, and people don't know the way, and they don't know the story. And so that's what I think we're all trying to rewrite here.
Yes.
It's like, all right, the novelty thing will fade. Like that won't work. But if you layer in a bunch of other stuff, you can get back to the similar state, but it's going to be even better because it's going to be deeper, and it's going to contain that deep commitment and love that you have for each other, and how well you know each other, and get you to even higher states because you've surrendered more, you've opened more, you've found out more of your totality of your essence, and you're bringing all that to the table rather than the fraction of you that you were bringing to the table and using novelty to get you to this, transcendent state.
Because the trans state includes tears and sex, but if you don't know that, then you sort of stop yourself ahead of time. And like, we're all here reporting from the front lines, I was like out in the dark by myself, like lost at the edges of the universe. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? I'm like, why can no one tell me? Trying to figure out what's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's, so one of the things that is an instrument that I think is not for everybody, and nothing is for everybody. We're not being prescriptive. I think the idea here is like, here's tools.
Let's be honest, breathing into your pussy, not for everybody.
But here's tools.
Comes with a warning sign.
I think one of the tools that it's captured the imagination very clearly. Look at 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah.
Like power exchange dynamics have captured the imagination of people, and it works. You can look at all of the statistics to show that it's one of the reliable ways, if you're willing. It's not for everybody, but it goes so deep if you're willing to go there. And there's also challenges and there's also pitfalls, but you have to really embrace this with this totality of like, all right, we're on a journey together. And just like if you go into an ayahuasca ceremony together, you can't say, all right, we're only going for this outcome.
Yeah.
Maybe at a certain point, there's going to be something that comes up. And at that point, you better stop the sex and be in this loving embrace and like heal whatever is coming. You have to be ready for everything that might come up, and just take this as like, all right, we're going into ceremony together. I'm going to explore dominance. You're going to explore submission. It could be either one of us, doesn't have to be male or female that's doing this, but we're going to go here and see what's on the other side of it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's going to yield this transient hypofrontality bliss state where you're both like, whoa, where did we go? That was amazing. Holy shit. Wow. And sometimes it's going to be stopping intercourse and just holding each other and then crying and feeling something. But I think that's also what needs to be told. It's not all just excitements and floggers and
or like my rope's too tight.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's there's the art of it, and there's the art and the subtlety of it, and watching what's coming up, and watching yourself, watching your partner, as well as completely surrendering and letting go. It's this balance of like really, really learning and exploring, but to know that it's kind of a portal that goes deep, deep, deep.
Super deep.
And how deep do you want to explore, and how many offshoots do you want to take? But that becomes exciting because then you're on an adventure together.
Totally.
And in that place, it's like, oh, sweet. Like, let's go on this adventure.
I do think there's also some level of, advisory, I would say, potentially beginning with some of the practices that you've talked about, because if somebody is really disconnected, that's where things can get a little squirrely. Like, I think the reason we've been able to go so deep with each other is because he's so in tune with me. It's like any micro thing that might happen, he can feel if I'm, fully with it and we push the table, or if I'm starting to retract a little bit because something, like we've had a variety of experiences where I've had repressed memories of being sexually violated, and like that, just like certain things have triggered things that have risen, and then he was able to just love me and hold space for me. And then there's also been the expression of just absolute full surrender to just like the most wild, crazy, like, we're going on this fucking roller coaster, let's go. Like it's been all of it. But I think for the masculine, and I can only speak to my own experience because I'm a woman, feeling like really safe and like the person feels you, like is really in tune with you, is so important. Just wanted to name that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And this whole portal is just one portal, right? There's like many other portals. So what I would throw the question back to you, feel free to comment on that particular portal, but also talk about some other portals that have this type of depth that can be explored, because this is just one type of portal. But I see, as you look out into your sexual union, it's like portals everywhere, it's like, whoa, and you've gone
meta
deep.
Portals and meta portals all the way into the meta portal, like
fractal portals all the way down. Yeah.
I just saw like a giant universal vagina with like fractal portals all the way down. Please, some sort of like visionary artist make that piece of art.
So good.
Android Jones looking at you. Okay.
I would love just to like name one thing just in this realm, just from like our personal experience of my own level of healing in this space. I actually, prior to being in this relationship, never felt comfortable with physical pain. Like I was actually like incredibly sensitive to physical pain. And when, we kind of began on this journey together, there was this moment where I could feel how the physical discomfort, from a flogger, felt like punishment because of that association from my childhood. and, you know, like I get spanked, I'm, you know, like I'm getting punished. And I craved from him feeling like loved after that moment. And he was in tune with me and, you know, showed up that way. And I could feel this moment where the physical pain switched in my psyche to actually excitement and turn on. Like it was like this very subtle thing that happened where it was like one moment I felt like a little bit like intense, like this is feeling like punishment, to, oh my God, this is exciting. And I'm, you know, like, so it actually felt like it was healing stuff in my psyche in that experience. So there's so many, would love for you to expand. But for me, there's been so many different levels of healing for getting to journey into these things that I have repressed, and have, you know, the masculine really be able to love me and support me and hold space for that. And also just like rewiring, like you've been talking about what's going on in your nervous system and in your brain, like just like rewiring patterns for a different kind of sexual expression.
Totally. Yeah. So I think the kink space, the BDSM space, like one of the reasons I feel like it's so powerful is because it's so intentional about holding a space and entering into a particular state while also finding edges. And so that is a portal, right? And so I actually train couples in kink training, whether they identify with that or want to explore that or not, because the concept of having a shared intention and then working towards it together through the embodied presence of a partner and the willing surrender of another, like that's the portal, right? Like we're like, whether you're playing with pain or ropes or pleasure, right? And so this idea of
or words,
yeah. Like what is it? How can I hold you in such a way that you become the portal, right? Like your experience itself becomes the portal. And so it's like, it sounds really advanced and meta, but it becomes so much more clear in something like the BDSM space where it's deeply studied and there's this whole like tradition. And so, yes, I believe it's one of the more profound portals. And part of it to me though, is because people are giving sexuality the structure that it's always deserved. You know, like how many of us think like, how deep can I take my partner in this moment to wherever it is that they want to go? And like, what is your edge? You know, like, is it an ecstatic edge? Is it a pain edge? Is it a submission edge? Like, what's your edge? And like, how do we interact together such that like, I am taking you to your edges, as opposed to like what, you know, like all these other ways that we've been discussing. And so some of those portals, since you asked, and I love the question, for me are like energy. Right? Like the more that sex becomes less just physical and more energetic, like when you hear like an 8-hour orgasm, like that's all knowing how to use the portal of energy, right? Because energy is infinite. Like my clitoris is limited, energy is infinite. So if you're like drawn to energy, the way that you can work with it, the way that you can penetrate with it, the way that you can surrender into it, it's a very potent portal. Consciousness, right? We all know that that's a portal, but the way that you use it in sex, right? Like you can be so in the sensation of your penis that like you are your, and like what that does, and like the, like that's its own rabbit hole, right? Like it's so powerful, all these different portals that we can find. I find there's an archetypal portal of basically like in Jungian psychology, right? Like you go deeper and deeper and deeper, and then there's like universal archetypes that show up. And you can do that in sex. So it's like sex becomes this portal to the embodiment of all the unfelt things, which are both spectacular and empowering and ecstatic and blissful and like horrifying, you know? And like, what does it look like to be in the portal of like the demonic embodiment? And so like, it's just, there's so much that you can play with in sex, and so many different types of portals.
Portals on portals.
So many portals.
Portals on portals. I just want a name that I really loved. And you were like, or words.
Aubrey Marcus.
I couldn't hold it in. I'm like,
Sex Jesus. Who can use the word portal. I was actually thinking your men's sexuality
beginning,
course
there was
should
the
be
word.
called Sex Jesus.
Sex Jesus.
Wailana, like at the beginning, was like, "Oh, Aubrey, maybe you should teach men, like, because you know you're so amazing at this." And Sex Jesus is clearly the name of your
course.
your online offering.
2022.
Talking about words, it's really interesting because it's come up in different sitcoms and things. They're talking about talking dirty and the challenge of it. You use the words but you listen. It's a conversation, right?
Yeah.
You're using like, what is this word? What's the feedback from the word? What is the feedback from this concept that we're bringing into the container? And like, what is the response? And you start using the right words, and then you start to see a response, and then you take a risk.
Yeah.
What about this word? What about this idea? And they're like, whoa, that word worked. That idea worked. And you're like, or you try this one, and you're like, too far. That word didn't work, like noted, wrong time, wrong delivery, but like, there's this like creativity to it. And I think that's another aspect that keeps things interesting is the creativity of it. I think salsa dancing, for example, can get really boring when you only have the same move. It's like, okay, here's the step. But you watch a really good dancer and there's infinite creativity. They're just all of these different things that they're exploring, even though they're sticking to a basic step.
Yeah.
And that idea of like being creative is another really beautiful element. Or surfing or whatever. It's like, how are you going to cut the wave? What's the move that you're going to make? How is the next way that you're going to find in? And that creativity of it is also really exciting and interesting, and whether that's a new ways to use a rope, or whether that's a new way to use your words, or a new way to use common objects around the hotel room that you're staying in,
My
like
God.
Whatever
He's
whatever
so
it is.
crafty.
He'll use espresso rabbit hole. He'll use it too far into the portal.
Current cups.
He'll use like a bathrobe. He gets like so creative. I'm like, wow. All right.
That's part of this kind of exploring together.
Yeah.
And there's this like really interesting aspect of it, but you have to be in an agreement where like, all right, we're here to create and explore and play. And I'm not always going to be right. Like sometimes
making a mistake.
Yeah. Sometimes
it
I'm going to make a
sounds so
mistake.
simple, but so many of us are so frozen in sexuality. Cause like, what if I fuck up?
Yeah.
Right.
Like I'm here to perform and like get this like outcome. So like, what if I do something stupid, or my lover doesn't like it, or like it totally turns them off? So like the courage to say the wrong word is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So we've talked about some of these different, is there anything else that you want to add as like some of the tools that couples can use? We've talked about energy. We've talked about power exchange and kink. And is there any other tools that you want to cover before we go to the third level of this, which is after you've, kind of really worked on self-mastery, worked on mastery within your union, and then other things that you can add to the container? But is there anything you want to add to this level, the middle level of just partnership?
So just to simplify it, because there's so much, right? Like there's so much in it, like, it's so amazing and endless. But you can take a lot of what we've already discussed and bring it into partnership, right? So like I'll have partners do like a shared body meditation, which makes them feel safe to be in their sensations together. Because even just like we've talked a lot about safety, there can be such a conditioned sense of like, I'm not safe to just feel what I feel inside. So you can do like body meditations together. You can do breath work together is super powerful. Like even just doing 5 minutes of breathing into your genitals before you have sex, or 5 minutes of breathing into your heart. It's so simple, and it can drastically change the way that you experience lovemaking. Even being conscious of the emotional tone that you bring into lovemaking with each other. And then also if you're doing your individual practices, like that alone brings so much into the container. And then, yes, there's sex magic. Like I think it's one of the most potent experiences for a couple to engage in, because it completely revolutionizes how you experience your sexual energy and the generative quality of what your sexuality can do together. It's a very powerful manifestation practice. Yeah, it's
so
endless.
Explain that to people a little bit, because I think we covered it a bit in our first podcast, and I've talked about it with, on a few different podcasts, but just the the cursory overview, because sex magic is a whole other deep portal that we go in. But for people who are like, what the hell are they talking about?
Such a good portal. Okay, sex magic is built on the premise that your sexual energy is a type of power. So you turn yourself on and you take that power and energy, your turn on essentially, and you spin it through each of the chakras. So you go through the 7 chakras and you're spinning it through your body. And you basically have an intention if you're on your own, or a shared intention as a couple. And when you get to the crown chakra, you shoot that energy out, which can be a peak experience of pleasure or it can be an orgasm, into the universe, and you visualize your intention in 5 senses reality. One of the reasons it's so powerful is that most of the time when we're thinking like, oh, I want to manifest something, we're like doing affirmations or we're thinking about it a lot, which again, it's engaging your prefrontal cortex. It's the most superficial part of your mind. And so if you want a powerful manifestation, you generally want to combine 3 things. You want a very powerful visualization. So I do whatever it is that you're creating, you do it in 5 senses reality. So your whole system is engaged in the visualization of the manifestation that you're creating. And it's very sensory at the same time. You also want the deepest parts of your nervous system and your mind in alignment with the manifestation, because the unconscious, the primal mind, whatever you want to call it, like that's the one with the real power to be looking at your environment and picking up cues of where you can actually be creating and having opportunities. As well, you can want something, but if you're terrified of it and your nervous system doesn't think you'll survive it, you're never going to get it. Yeah. So what's so cool is in the tantric tradition, one of the reasons that you activate the 7 chakras is to bring your entire nervous system and body online. So in the sex magic practice, you're actually bringing your whole unconscious into the practice. So it's essentially listening, because you're bringing your body with you and your whole energy system with you before you do the manifestation. And the last thing that you need is a high energy state. So being in a high state of pleasure, you've just done all this energy work and now you're having an orgasm. It's basically like manifestation on steroids.
Yes. All right. So we're going to close down this middle world. We're going to go take a bathroom break, and then we're going to talk about expanding. And for the adventurous, for the truly adventurous. And we're back. And we're back. So the 3rd chapter of this podcast is about, all right, so you've done the work individually, you've done the work in your union, you've explored some things, and you're like, all right, now let's see what's available if we open the container to include other people. And there's many ways that you can explore that. But I guess the way to start is, when is the time? What are some of the good reasons to explore this? Like, what is the why, first of all? Because I think we started with the challenges we're trying to overcome personally and in relationship. And I think there are some deep challenges, and maybe there's challenges that opening a container to include other people can help you overcome. And I suppose we could start with that, because some are coming to mind, and some of these include jealousy issues. This is an amazing way to like really have to sit with your jealousy, your possessiveness, your fear that somebody is going to be better than you in some way, your fear that you're going to lose love. And, this is something that gets ingrained in all of us in certain levels. And I think this is something that, if you wanted to share, that you've really had to kind of think about and realize how deeply this has impacted your life because of your own history and partnership.
Yeah, it's definitely a really, really deep one for me, of feeling, and I'm still getting there, of just knowing that it's safe to trust in love. So recently I've been having, we've been having these like very beautiful open conversations around deepening our sexuality and, all these other elements. And my programming has always been that, at some point, it doesn't matter if it's great or not great, like at some point there comes a time where there's another person and that person is a level of threat to me. And my own protective mechanisms over myself is to be better, wanting to be the one that's chosen, all this stuff. So what's been happening for me recently is I've been experiencing this trigger that will happen that is my body's knowing over the tiniest little things, like things that I actually consciously don't even feel triggered by at all. But my body is having this energetic adrenaline response to something, and I'm having two full experiences in different ways. So on the one level, I'm feeling my body's memory that's like, alarm, 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 you know what this looks like. Watch out. You're about to get obliterated again. Here's this thing. And then there's my knowing in my heart that's like, that it's so not that at all. I see this programming. I see this patterning, you know. And so I'm having both of these experiences, and I could feel, you know, there's my desire for myself and in this partnership is to feel fully free. You know, I had been my former partnership, we had danced in the realm of polyamory and all being intimate with each other. So I can feel this part of my body that feels afraid of sensuality with women, because that equaled a lot of pain for me. If I opened myself to being sensual, or, you know, as I was, this is sharing a lot, but sexual with a woman, that equals a lot of pain for me down the road. So like, don't do that, you know? So I have all of these things that are happening, and this is where you wanted me to go. But I could feel in this container of love and potential exploration, which we've only just been, you know, talking about it. What I desire for myself is the liberation of that fear, is the reclamation and the establishment that I no longer have to live by that story. Yeah. You know, and we've been, you know, deepening our love, and this container has been the most safe thing that I've ever experienced. And still that little voice that's like, watch out, I've noticed more recently is kind of like pinpointing little tiny things, which really wonderfully, I think, because this container is so safe, I'm so able to track it. It's not like it consumes me and I'm like, what the hell's happening? I'm just like, wow, my body is feeling this crazy turmoil, and my knowing is like, that's not what's happening. But I can feel that I'm in this space of bridging those two places and learning how to, for my nervous system to just feel fully safe and liberated from the story that I've literally lived in my entire life of being in relationship to the masculine. So I don't know where you wanted to go with that, but that's what's been really present for me. Like, I know, as ayahuasca showed me, going into the fear is the way that I liberate myself, you know, and that means feeling the truth of what our relationship is, and just the deep knowing that I'm so safe for it, you know, in that exploration. But
so that's and I think, so there's a great liberation in that, but liberation is only one reason, I think, to do it. And then I think on the other side, we were able to feel in, because we both understand that, and we understand how important it is to be free. And this is part of our own personal work. Oh, we're contracted around this thing. All right, well, let's do the work to become free, because that's what we really want to be. That's our divine expression, is radical freedom.
Totally.
But to really understand that on the other side of that freedom is the opening and the possibility for just increased ecstasy, you know. And I think in a recent MDMA assisted little ceremony that we had together before she went off to Hawaii, you know, really, Wailana started tapping into the ecstasy that was possible on the other side of that, you know, with connection with a woman, or and in these different expanded containers, knowing that our bond is infallible, right? Like it's nothing is going to interfere with that. So it's a deep trust and deep safety, and being free of all the fear and all of those, but then also realizing that, and on the other side of this fear and on the other side of this contraction is absolute bliss.
Yeah.
Is another divine being offering their divine codes into this thing and creating even more of a cosmic portal that's possible.
Totally.
So it's, I guess the problem that we've been, it's kind of both things. One is the problem of being contracted, and this is a way to solve it, but also the gift of what can come on the other side of it. And I suppose that's a place that also many people might be finding. They might be constricted by this thing, and there may be nothing going on, but it's that one look that someone gave, or this person who's a friend, or this, a conversation with an ex or whatever. And it's creating this massive contraction, which is then influencing their ability to be in union together. So this is a way to just push, with love, like stretch the limits and then see if there's some real ecstasy on the other side that's available.
Yeah, I love that.
We just went deep. Okay, world, you know exactly where we're at.
Well, that is kind of our way, right? I mean,
there you go.
Our
I'll
people.
follow you down.
I love you, Mom. I know you'll be okay with it.
Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting point about opening things up, right? Like, I do think that some people open things up because they're not fully satisfied, because there are things they don't want to look at, because of the desire for novelty. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, sure. If that's the highest bliss available to them in that moment, who cares? Like, people are hiding in monogamy too. So like, who cares if people hide in polyamory? Like, that's up to them to decide how they want to live and like what's going to work for them. And I have seen in it, and it was part of my own experience and growth with Andrew, that like in a level of trust and depth of bond and like depth of knowing that there is this way that the openness feeds and fuels your connection. Like your connection is the sacred center point, and like those other touch points end up fueling, healing, rocketing to ecstasy. And like when Andrew was behind, we were always like, it's funny, I always used to say monogamish, and I thought that just meant like, hey, yeah, we can like make out with people sometimes or like play with energy. And then I was like, oh shit, no, the actual Dan Savage version is like, we can fuck other people. And I was like, I guess I was telling the whole world I was way more open than I was in those like early years without even realizing it. And so when Andrew was like, I want to experience like orgies and threesomes and stuff like that, like I was super triggered, and I was just like, go do it on your own, So like I was like, go fly to some New York situation, like far be it from me to deny you an orgy before you die, but like I don't want to be a part of it. And then when we went really, really deep and found a new level of connection in our partnership, I was like, what are you doing, Layla? Like, you're going to be on your deathbed one day. Like, did you want to get in the center of the French orgy or not? For you. Not the story of like what he wants, not the story of what the world wants. What do you want more than anything else? And I was like, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and jump the fuck in. I was like, for me. Yeah. And so I like wholeheartedly started to embrace that experience. And it was interesting because I had identified as bisexual in college. Like I dated a few women, and then I was like, maybe I'm more straight than I thought. I don't know. Yeah. Kind of like put it to rest. And then I think like really truly, because I didn't know what to do with a pussy, and I like became Layla Martin in the world, I was like, I can't like if I don't know what to do with a pussy, like what? And I was like, Layla, just speak it and like just get over it. This is very simple. So me and Andrew did like a play experience, and there was this gorgeous tantrika, and she was so amazing. And I not only made love with her, but like fell madly in love with her. And I was like, oh, this is like part of my sexuality, and it's not for a man, and it's not for anybody else. It's something so sacred and eternal and true in me. Yeah. And like, I take this back. And like, that was so healing for me and so powerful. And so there was something, as I continued to explore, there is a connection that I have with women that is unlike what I can do with a man.
It's a, and I can speak to this because I've experienced it a couple times. It's a beautiful thing to be tuned in with a woman in like a very sensual or sexual way, where like I understand so much why men love, making love or fucking or having sex with women. Like it's a beautiful thing. And there's something, you know, I don't personally just look at a woman and be like, I want to bang her. Like, I don't feel that at all. But like, there's something to it that's just so different that I have so much reverence and appreciation for. And I think there's some level of my own, you know, desire for exploration with that, which is purely because it's for me.
Totally. And it's been so co-opted. It's like, oh, like you make out with your girlfriends in college, like in the bar so the guys can watch or whatever. Or like, it's like
it's always for the masculine or like, you know, it's what they want, so I'm going to do it, which is, that's how it started for me, but ended up being, you know, beautiful in its own way. But there's, Yeah. And it's funny how everything can get so flipped on its head, right? Because it's like, I feel like as women, we've been conditioned to be jealous, to see each other as competitors. To compete,
And also like in that reality before where it's like my husband is my only ticket to survival on this planet, like for sure every other woman is my enemy. Like for sure that's competition, you know? And who knows about what's in there in like the chimpanzee brains of us as well. Like who knows what's like conditioning, what's primal, like, you know, we can't even really tell. And one of the things that I've really found in this like energetic, like devotional, sexy, like ecstatic reverence with women is I'm just like, wow, like how different the planet would be if we let ourselves have that. And I truly believe that it can go all the way to like full sex, but there's also just like an energetic sensuality that's so easy with women that I feel is like so much more of the natural state. That we're so like
we're so uptight because we're in competition. Like so, and that was my, you know, that was the space I was in my last partnership. We were in a kind of like three-way situation, and it was like, that's where I think that programming comes for me, is it's like I've experienced this really beautiful thing, and also it's not safe because we were in competition. So there's so many layers of unwinding for me and my psyche and programming. But there is this, I would love to just feel so relaxed in my fullest expression of sex, because I'm sensual and sexual by name. I mean, we all are. But I feel that in myself, and I'd love to liberate that expression so that I feel like I'm being my truest sense of myself.
Well, I just see too, like the thing when I'm talking to you is you're such like a luminous sexual being. And like, I don't feel that there's anything wrong in you. I just feel like you're so open to being all of it that like, you bump up in the places where you're not yet letting yourself be all of that which you desire. But the underlying thing is actually the desire to be all of it. So like when you're talking to me, I kind of don't see you as someone with like problems or issues. I see you as someone who's like this like expansive, like supernova into this world of being that's like so inspiring to feel and to recognize. And I remember just like me on my sexual journey, because I'm, you know, like sexual abuse and Catholic and like good girl and like all of the things. And I was just like, this is part of it. Like, it's just like my expansion shows me all of those pieces. So it's just like, as you're articulating these things, I just have this reverence for you to be so expanded that you're in such a discovery process of all of this. Like, it's so brave. And just like you were saying, the more of us that are doing it on the planet, the more it just like activates the potential for everyone.
Yeah. And also, you know, I feel so safe. Like, it's incredible and such a blessing to be so safe, like truly, truly safe. The level of healing that I've had just through love, you know, rather than suffering, has been immense.
I think, you know, for me in this journey, you know, I've had threesomes and different things, but it was always, at the start, it was always just me and other women. And I had this idea, this construct, that there's the alpha lion, and then there's, you know, he fights all rivals to the death, the alpha bull, you know, and nobody, like, it was this idea that I got from other men and from a misrepresentation of nature itself. And so it was actually at a point where I didn't even want my, you know, first partner, Caitlin, to even show her nipples. She could do anything she wanted, dance however she wanted, but like nipples. Stay. Like nipples is where the line is crossed, right?
Meanwhile,
But meanwhile,
later on, there's gonna be 10 girls up in this bed.
I mean, the hypocrisy of that was intense, right? But there was this construct that I had, and so then I read Chris Ryan's, work, and I was like, fuck, I had it all wrong, and this is the wrong idea, and if it needs to be absolutely egalitarian, like we both must be able to explore what we want to explore, and then entered into the polyamory journey with Whitney, and we explored all that, deeply challenging, deeply liberating. But there was a beauty of, and occasionally in different situations, there would be another man present, but there was always another man not present. It was actually easier when the other man was present, because the imagination was far worse than what the actuality was. Like I always came back to this saying, it's worse than you hope, but not as bad as you fear. Like what's happening, maybe you hope it's like just like very soft, gentle lovemaking that happens quickly. Well, it's probably not that, but you're probably afraid that it's this massive porno shoot of like the most insane thing that you've ever seen ever, and like that's what you're afraid of. But reality is just reality. It's just two people engaging in however they're engaging. And so there was a real liberation from my natural competitiveness, even though some of that was there, but being able to work through that, even though it wasn't frequent, every once in a while, like working through that was really helpful for me to get beyond that. So as then we approach this, it's like, all right, I feel like I've experienced it. I've gotten past a lot of the jealousy and things. And it's not like I'm over it. It's not like, oh yeah, I'm all good. You know? And I definitely don't have that impulse in me that gets excited. And I never did about the thought of somebody making love to my partner or fucking them. It was like, that never like triggered that button that a lot of people have where it's like, oh, that's hot. I didn't have that thing. I wish I did. That would have made it easier. But it was a deep acceptance of that thing.
Yeah.
And I think, so there's less about a contraction that I'm trying to kind of overcome, and more about, all right, like what is possible if we do this in a truly conscious way? Because always before it was, I don't think anything's ever happened before 2 a.m.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was always like after like plenty of drinks, maybe some other substances and whatever else. It was just like, all right, we're doing this. Like, here we go. But like to really consciously curate an experience of like, all right, there's intentionality behind this. And I think there's this idea that it's just going to like magically happen. All of a sudden we're all going to be hanging out and we're going to be sober hanging out. And then all of a sudden we're all just going to like start hooking up, and that it's just not reality, right? To like do this the right way. Yeah. It feels like there's an intentionality that needs to come. I mean, it's not that there's a wrong way, and I don't regret anything that I've experienced. It was the way that I learned, and it was the way I experienced.
You did it well.
And it was a beautiful time. But I think what's interesting to me is like real intentionality behind it. Like, all right, let's talk about it, and let's go into this experience with an idea of what we're looking to explore and what we're looking to get. But the question is really how to start approaching this, rather than let's all drink, let's all dance, and then at the end of the night, if there's something happening, then we'll, just go for it. And that's cool. That's all good. But what's interesting is being more intentional, but not in the way that feels predatory or like a way that feels awkward, but a way that's like, all right, how do you enter into this with more intention is, I guess, the question, because that's not something I've ever really been a part of.
Yeah. So I definitely have two experiences to share that I think are really relevant to this. The first is like my first experience of doing any of this communally was actually women who had studied my practices and were my friends. Like they'd started as my friends, but they did my programs, and they were like, we want to do the practices together. And like my Catholicism means that like if you get me in a ritual space, like I'm limitless. Like if it's in service of God or enlightenment, like you better believe I will be free as anything. When it's in like human reality, I was more like, oh my, and like also lived in Georgia for some formative years, all of that. So I was like, you guys want to do sex magic together? And I was like, okay. And so I started hosting practices where my friends would do their own energy orgasm practices, or they'd do their own pleasure practices, and then we'd start doing sex magic together. And I really remember, because I always identified like tantric lineage, like I make people work hard, like spirituality is intense, right? Like I like come from like some of that like old school lineage as part of me. I never thought of myself as a witch. Like I never thought of myself as like just like a freewheeling like human here to like do what I desire. And after, I'd say it was probably like a year of kind of like friends and community, all women at the time, like doing these practices, all of a sudden I was like standing in nature with like a circle of like 9 women all doing sex magic. And we were like free and liberate, and everyone was in their divinity. And it was like so incredible. And like all illusions around like sisterhood being around competition, like it just melted. And we were just in like sacred adoration of each other's like orgasm and magnificence and holiness and rawness. And I was like, holy shit, I'm standing in a circle naked doing sexual practices in the middle of the forest. I am definitely a fucking witch. And this is absolutely what they burned witches for in Europe. Like I just knew it in my bones. I was like, this is the thing they were trying to stop, because like, whoa. And I was like, wow. And so it was like, to your question, I did so long doing my own practices, doing practices within a couple. And then there was this explosion of this other energy, right? Which is like one of my favorite things to do, which is like, wow. And then there's this. And like everyone who would come to those practices had done their own level of work, their own level of experience. And it was still like melting shame, melting stories around what it is to like masturbate around other people. Like so much of our most derogatory, like circle jerk, or like fear of orgies. Like orgy comes from orgia. It's the Greek word for the mystical rites in sacred celebration of the goddess. We've been taught to fear like sexuality, any kind of communal situation. And I was just like, like, this is so magical, like so sacred and so healing. And so I've done like lots of those. And then my friends were like, we want it to be co-ed. And I was like, oh, my monogamous married friends are going to hate me. But I was like, whatever, I'm in surrender. The universe obviously wants this. So we'd started doing co-ed sex magic, and I would do like powerful gender healing, or like have people like masturbate and like express all the shame and judgment that they'd ever felt from their family, while everyone else just like held the space, and then go into like this full celebration of them. Well, everyone says yes, yes, yes. So like you just imagine like what's possible in community, like how we can like heal each other's sexuality, how we can honor each other like so deeply. And this is just sex magic where like no one's even interacting with each other. So like that alone, just like, wow, we can even be in our own sexual space, and it can be so radically healing, and it's so powerful. And there's just something so, I'm like, yeah, I totally wanted to do this before I died. Like, why? Like, what was I even thinking? Not spending like Sundays doing this. And then in 2019, because like people had always been like, oh yeah, you should do play parties. I was like, I will not be one of those tantra teachers. Like I will never, like I am not going to go down that rabbit hole. Like I am the pure, pristine tantra teacher who like holds incredible, like healthy boundaries. And like, I'm mostly in monogamous relationships, I'm so safe. And then I read The Surrender Experiment and by Michael Singer, and me and Andrew just took this like full, like we're going to surrender to the universe. And so this is really like a process of, it's not what my mind thinks. I'm going to feel what's being called for. Like I'm going to feel into the energy, the alignment. I'm going to do that regardless of what I'm thinking in my head. So I took this vow, right? And like in my mind, I was literally like, the universe is going to want me to like feed the homeless. Like I'm going to have to be more of service in this way. I'm going to have to like give up some of my objects. Like I don't know what I was thinking. And like within the first 48 hours, I was hosting 3 play parties. I was like, the universe wants me to host play parties? What? And I was like, fuck. Fuck. And like I literally got an email of someone being like, thank you, Layla, for volunteering to host such and such play party. And I was like, I didn't volunteer to, I haven't even, who is this person? Like, it was just so clear. And I was like, why would the universe want this? And like, in New York, and I made YouTube videos about this, like I went to play parties, they were always hosted by men. They always felt like a lot of like, alcohol, cocaine, like sex and stuff. And it didn't turn me on. Like I wasn't like, oh, I want to partake in this. And Andrew didn't believe me at the time. I was like, this just isn't my jam. Like, this isn't turning me on. He was like, you're in resistance. I was like, nope, not my jam. And so I literally was like, okay, what if I took the same mystical sensibility that like causes me to do my work. Like the reason I do my work in the world is because I know that we are made of magic and ecstasy, and our sexuality is a portal to God. And I want everyone to know that, right? And I was like, what if I took that same truth and allowed people to play in their sexuality with that? And so like I hosted those, and I just did like tantric breathwork, mystical rites, de-shaming processes, and like held the container with like an hour on consent and boundaries, like so like deep into like, what does it look like for people to feel so safe and for them to realize that like ecstasy is sacred? And what does it feel like to come together in divine ecstasy? And what was so amazing is I had been so horrified to like engage in those experiences because I really like, I could only imagine some of the low vibration things I had seen. And then I was like, wait, I'm a tantrika. Like God is in the low vibration, the lowest vibration. Like take it, Layla, and like make it conscious, like bring consciousness to it and see what happens. And it was crazy because like after those experiences, like my friends, like in this hedonistic revelry, sacred abandon, they were the purest I have ever seen them. Like so bright, so illuminated, so in themselves. And I was like, wow, we've just been taught that like this is so like low vibration, so off limits, so scary, right? And there's a systematic, like there's a whole campaign by the Christian church to turn goddess rites into demonic things that put you in hell forever. So we have all this fear around them. And I was like, wow, when there's intentionality, when people bring love to it, when there's sacredness here, it's so divine. And so like, I felt like the universe was like, well, Layla, here's all your egoic stories about like what is sacred and right and holy. And like, we're going to put you in the center of the thing that you've most resisted and like find truth here. And in doing that, it was so amazing. And I used to just be like, oh, I would never make out with my friends. It's so dramatic, blah, blah, blah. And then it was like, wow, there's just so much possibility for intimacy that I didn't even, it just broke me open. And I realized that our hearts are as conditioned as our pussies and our penises, who we can love and how and why. And none of it for me and my shadow, like I love like how deep you can go and like live all the things. Like my shadow is like, it must be pure and holy, right? Like it doesn't need to be pure and holy, but I'll bring that to whatever I do. Like that's part of my process. And in experiencing that, I was just like, there's this whole beautiful dimension of sexuality and play that can be expressed. And I was putting what it felt like to be in my 20s on my friends. So I was like, this is going to be nothing but a world of drama. It's going to end up in a dumpster fire. We're all going to hate each other in 5 years. You're going to destroy your communities and everyone's going to hate you as the sex witch that you are, you know? And like, I was like, ah! And then it was so much beauty because everyone had done their work. And everyone showed up and they brought that sensibility. And it wasn't, there was literally in all, like pretty much no drama, like so much just like honoring and reverence and like the quality of the experiences. It's just been so much beauty. And so for me in those experiences, it was so additive. And one of my friends, I think, described the like her experience of it as like Burning Man-esque, where it's just like, wow, you can live this way. Like, I didn't know that. And like, I didn't know that it was possible to have more love, more ecstasy, more freedom, and just more beauty. Because I think the thing that I experienced out of that was like, I didn't do that personally from a space of, I have a hole in me and I need to fill it somehow. And again, I've filled so many holes in my life. I continue to do so. But in that one like experience, I wasn't like, oh, there's something missing. Let me go try and fill it. It was like, I have so much beauty and magic and ecstasy to share. And like, I want you to all know that too. And like, what would happen, right? If we shared from that space. And so it just felt like it built and built and built. So like, I love how you picked up on, there's this, like, you do the individual journey and then you do the couple journey. And there is something there, like whether people want to explore it or not. And like, I still feel scared saying that. And like, you know, my friends, when they first asked me to do these things, and I was so just like, no. And I was so sure that I wouldn't be accepted, that like I would scare the shit out of everybody, because like I stand in a room and like ecstatic mystical rites want to start happening, you know? And so for me to do that in community was absolutely terrifying. And Andrew said to me at the time, he was like, Layla, why are you so terrified? Everyone loves you for this. They want this. This is what everyone's hungry for. And I was like, There weren't any high priestesses when I was growing up that didn't get sent to hell or burned at the stake or like abandoned or go crazy or left, alone. Like I grew up where to be that thing as a woman was one of the most dangerous things that you could be to society. And so to hold a space for people to commune in ecstasy and freedom and sexuality, like even in 2021, feels fucking scary and like and wild. And there's just like so much beauty in it, so much beauty. And I really thought the other day, I was like, wow, like it's not my career calling, but like someone out there is like can show people how to do this, right? Like because we're so hungry for it. And I feel like it melts the loneliness that people have and the isolation. There's something so coming home about it. Even just the sex magic when you're in your own process, you never touch anyone else. But it's like we take this thing that we've been so ingrained to think is like, you have to do it so alone. And then it becomes communal. And there's just something healing about it that's kind of indescribable.
That's beautiful. Let's get a little pragmatic for people here. Let's say you don't know a high priestess who can hold a play party and create this. And maybe you know what the other thing is, the cocaine and masks, hedonism thing, that you're not really into that and you don't want to sign up to Sanctum and do these other things. But like you have a group of conscious people, maybe one, maybe three, whatever, however many there are. What do you think is the way to, without guidance from the priestess, without guidance from the maenad, to say like, all right, let's get in here and let's start to explore. Let's take it gradual. But like, what's the way to kind of get a group together, without access to someone who really knows what the fuck they're doing, to like start to enter into this with some learning.
I mean, Aubrey, we're all just walking ourselves home. Like I haven't even systematized this thing. I'm like, I'd be stretching because I'm still just even exploring it myself. I think like definitely the safety is so important, like consent and boundaries. I think one of the things that's so important is that the women feel so fucking safe.
Yeah.
Like what did they need to feel safe? What did they want? Like what did they need in that space? And even like having them lead it or just really express what it is that they need to feel, and whatever that is, honoring it. Right? Because I think that's one of the things that makes like the spaces I've experienced so magical is the women are safe. And like that's unfortunately so rare. I think having very clear boundaries going in ahead of time. So like make-out parties are super fun where it's like, yeah, we're not necessarily going to like all have sex with each other. We're just going to be in lingerie and like make out with each other, And so like dipping a toe in, like really valuable because then you learn so much. I think having integration afterwards where you all sit around and like talk about your experience, what came up, who got jealous, who had a thing, who had a misunderstanding, like all of that's so powerful because I think it's the unspoken, unintegrated things that like can end up sort of ripping people apart. But if you sit down and share them and integrate them, so beautiful. I think really important in the beginning, sober, or only things that are like consciousness enhancing. Like then you can play with substances later if you want, but I think when you're really stepping into it and you want it to feel ritualistic, like so important. My favorite play experiences have actually been sober, even though I'll like play with all kinds of stuff as well. Like I really enjoy that level of connection. And yeah, I mean, I guess for just pulling that out of my ass, I think that would be the starter kit.
Your ass is a rich portal of things that can emerge as gifts to humanity, Layla.
Oh my God.
Don't talk about your ass as if this is not a place.
It is a portal to divine. It's one of the portals amongst portals. That should have been my answer when you're like, what are the unexplored sexual portals? My asshole. Number one.
Things that come out of there that are magnificent. I think that's a beautiful guideline, and I think people with just that alone gives like enough of like, okay, I kind of get it.
Yeah.
I kind of get what it is, and I think really letting the women lead.
Totally.
Really letting the women lead and holding that as the divine masculine of like, I'm here in service.
Then it's something that's so empowering. like so empowering to be able to like take the lead for once and guide something in what feels like safe and exciting and ecstatic for you. I personally I really love dancing like a stripper. I got that in me. I just love it.
Yeah.
So that's what I would do.
I do too, actually. I do too.
He's really good at lap dances. He's really good.
Receiving them or giving them?
Giving them.
Both. Yeah. Oh,
well,
I can imagine.
Obviously receiving them, but giving them, he's really good. The last time we went to a strip club, we were playing games like it wasn't even it just was a really fun night. And
we're playing like quarters.
Yeah. So I don't remember what the rules were, but it ended up being this dare situation. So the very last one we did, I won and he had to receive the dare. So he had to air dance on this random chair in the middle of the club with like other people sitting there, and he's just like pretending there's somebody on it, and he's like really getting after it. He flips the chair upside down and he like goes even harder. Then he had to climb to the table like on all fours and give everyone a lap dance, and it was amazing.
I was gassed at the end. I was exhausted. I was like, I thought I was in shape. That was
Takes a lot of energy. Yeah.
That was a lot.
Yeah, you do have major like Channing Tatum vibes now that I think about it. Like in a different lifetime. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh man.
Yeah. And I think, and I share this because I was thinking, I was like, wow, like, I think this is next level for a lot of people. And I think it's like, I truly think it's of deep service to the planet for people to at least be open to this possibility if they're drawn to it, if they feel, because there is something so powerful to it. And we've been given so many codified restrictions against it. So there's so much fear around it.
Yeah.
But truly, like I've walked so many people through that fear portal where they're just like, what about my relationship? What about jealousy? What about all the intent? Like it's like so strong in people's bodies. And every single person has been like, oh my God, I was so terrified. And there was such beauty on the other side, like such beauty in all the ways. Part of that as well is taking, like we've been talking about in this thing, like take yourself to it.
Yeah.
And like listen. And it's so hard to do that sometimes. When you do that, it's so for you. And also something I want people to know is like women want this too. And
I mean, that's why I, wanted to just deeply share my own experience that I haven't really played in that realm very much, but like I feel that desire within me just to explore my own expression more in a way that's not contracted or in fear, like I'm going to be abandoned, like I feel like I'm finally in a container where that can kind of come alive. And I can feel like I as he had mentioned in the ceremony that we did, just tuning in with the bliss that is being so free from being able to express yourself fully, and just for everyone listening, just really tuning in with like, what's true for me, A lot of times when there's a trigger, it's an edge, but on that other edge is like immense freedom if you can really tune into, like what you need, what the situation needs, like how you can push those edges, also be loving and having healthy boundaries. But like this is what has been, most alive in our conversations recently, that I can feel myself about to like step through this threshold where life becomes even more blissful than it already is, because I get to rewrite the story. I get to take my power back. I get to fully express my sensuality and sexuality and deep connection with people that I love. It's like, it's freaking exciting. That's my next, I can feel it.
That's what we're here to do.
That's the next level of evolution.
Yeah.
And I don't know necessarily what exactly that looks like, but it's like, I feel it happening
totally
for me,
Such a universal fuck yes to that on so much yes.
Yeah, that ecstasy is like it's a guidepost. You know, like find your bliss.
Yeah.
And even if you have to go through the shadows to find it, great. Like explore. And maybe some things that you think are going to get you bliss don't take you there. Okay, you learn. You're like, oh, okay, that portal doesn't go anywhere that I want to go. Not all portals lead to the right place. Some are dead ends, and that's okay.
Totally.
Just so see, but use that. I think we've kind of made pleasure a derogatory thing, but like go seek your pleasure.
And be curious, just like have curiosity about it. And sometimes sometimes it's not going to be the thing, but you're still learning. You're still finding yourself. You're still coming home. You know, like it's all part of the path. But like, I wish that I, in my life, would just allowed myself to be more curious.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So magical. And, you know, I've even said this recently, like to my own audience, you know, like there's this part of me that's like I'm scared that people will be like, you know, I'm going to do a 15-minute pleasure practice and breathe into my penis. And before I know it, I'm going to be naked in a circle of sex switches in like a polyamorous situation, you know? And it was easier for me when I was living a life where I was like, you know what, you can do this and you can be monogamous and you can be so like hetero and like all of these things. And I was like, I just had to stand in front of people and say like a tantric approach is what's true. You know? And so if you end up doing these practices, if you open up your sexuality, like you don't know where you're going to end up. You're going to end up with what's the truth. And for some people, that's monogamy. For some people, that's just doing some breath work and never going farther. And for some people, that is full-blown ecstatic curiosity into the great unknown and like cannot promise a guaranteed outcome when you go into like the majesty that's your sexuality, like can only promise that you will end up doing like what is true that is so far beyond what so many of us have ever imagined. And like sexuality is this like magical box that like opens up those possibilities. And I think that's another reason why people can often be so scared of it.
And whatever that true is perfect. And there's no better true than the other, whether you're in this ecstatic multi-person thing or whether it's just, as you said, just some breath work and some more awareness and a little bit more love and forgiveness is not a value proposition of this is better, this is worse. Wherever you are, wherever you wind up, when that place is true, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. God circled that place for you on a map.
Totally. And so many more of my practices have been like crying alone with like a dildo inside of me, just like, you know, in my bedroom being like, oh, we're here again, you know? There's at least 100 of those practices forever, like every divine, ecstatic, blissful experience, you know?
Well, it's an honor. It's an honor to be here with both of you goddesses. And thank you for your vulnerability and your honesty and for leading this way in a place where, you know, the historical kind of hereditary archetype is to be really afraid of stepping out in this way, in the way that you are. And, you know, I deeply, deeply honor your courage for doing that because it takes a lot of courage. And so thank you for walking the path and shining the light so that we can all see our way through the dark.
Thank you. Thank you for having so much reverence for the goddess and for the healing and possibility that you've brought to my life and exude to, you know, the rest of the world through our relationship.
Thank you for being such a goddess. Everybody is. Layla, people who are fired up and want more Layla, more. Where can they go for more?
You can go to laylamartin.com, sign up with your email address. And I have two main programs. So I have the Vita coaching certification for becoming a sex, love, and relationship coach. And then also Vita sacred sexuality. So that is an initiation into all these sacred sexuality practices. And it's basically a year-long program. You can do it month to month where you can tune in and like all of this, you basically get live guided initiations into everything we've discussed today and so much more. Oh, and I also have a men's sexual mastery training.
Ooh.
We like underplayed that. And then we turned it evergreen and like the men are so into it. So there is a men's sexual mastery training. So you can do everything that we've talked about in this podcast and take it so much deeper.
Go, and gods and goddesses, go.
And Aubrey's Jesus, what did you go? Sex Jesus 101
coming
Jesus
in
program 2022.
Doesn't exist.
We can co-affiliate.
Doesn't exist. We got a lot of work to do. All right.
Sex witch and sex Jesus. Like
we're going to end right there, everyone. Love everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Goodbye. Thank y'all. Thanks for tuning into this video. Make sure you hit subscribe. Follow me at Aubrey Marcus. Check out the Aubrey Marcus podcast, available everywhere. And leave a comment. Let me know if this video resonated or what else you would like to hear from me in the future. Thank you so much.